Hello.
Howdy, Tom.
Hey, how you doing?
Very well. Thank you so much for sending those out. I appreciate
Oh, no problem.
it. Super duper.
Evening.
Hi.
Everybody, good evening.
Oh,
Howdy.
Greetings all.
Hello.
Hey, Larry.
Larry.
Hi, Anime.
Everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Mike.
Larry, Scott literally just showed up at my door, so thank you.
Okay, I don't know what I did, but
Sounds like it's okay, whatever it was.
yeah, well, I hope so.
It all worked out in the end.
Thus the mask, which I like the colors.
Hey, Anime, we expecting school committee
committee?
members?
For sure.
Okay.
Yes, 100%.
Oh, there's Megan. Still need Mr. Murby, some SBC members as well. Oh, there's one.
So Mike,
Yes, Pete.
Chris had suggested that I read the emergency proclamation from the governor whenever you're ready to start.
Yeah, I think it will give it maybe a couple minutes. I know.
Okay.
Do you know if Gus was planning to join, Chris?
Gus is planning on joining.
Okay. Let's
He'd
see.
better, it's a posted meeting.
I would hope so. I could use a few more members of the SBC as well. I don't think I have a quorum yet. For me, we don't have a school committee quorum yet. Oh, there's Jess.
Yeah, I think you have quorums for everybody, Mike.
Let me just double check. I've got Anime, myself, Mike, Tom, and Jeff. So yeah, I do have a quorum. Okay. Oh, and there's Leo. People popping in all over the place. So I'm ready when you are, Pete.
Okay. Um,
I have a quorum too. Yeah, we're good.
So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and School Building Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. And then I'm going to ask Jess Riley to open the meeting, I guess, for the school committee.
All right. I'd like to call the meeting of the school committee to order, please, with a roll call. Anime O'Shea Brook,
Here.
Leo Brem,
Here.
Tim Knight,
Here.
Megan Glenn,
Here.
and Jessica Riley here. We are all in attendance.
Okay. And I will announce that the meeting is being recorded. Any votes will be roll call votes. And is Gus here now too?
Don't see him just yet.
Okay, so that we have a quorum of the Board of Selectmen. And Mike, do you want to call your school building committee?
Sure. Just as a point of order, do we need to do a roll call attendance, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. So I will call a meeting to order for the Dale Street School Building Committee, and we will also do a roll call attendance. Mike Marcucci,
Yeah, I'm here.
Anime O'Shea Brook,
Here.
Mike LaFrancesca,
Here.
Steve Grenham,
Here.
Mike Weber,
Here.
Jeff Marsden,
Here.
Leo Brem,
Here.
Walt Kincaid,
Here.
Tom Erb,
Here.
and Amy Colleran.
Here.
And then I'll just ask if Gus Murby is present yet.
Not yet. But you have a
Okay.
quorum, so you can move forward.
All right, and so Mike and I are both here. So, okay, over to you, Mike Quinlan. then.
What more do you need, Pete? Really?
I think we need a couple more committees, Mike.
All right. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. This is obviously quite the coordinated effort to get so many people here together for this evening, and it's an important topic. So I'm pleased to see that we have about 60 members of the public here to start off the meeting. Chris, if you could just keep an eye on the lobby in case Gus or any other SBC members show up, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Or somebody. And then just as a point of reference for how the process will go tonight, we have a presentation prepared. We're hoping to get through it in about a half an hour. And then we will move to the public comment and question and answer session. In preparation for that, I would ask that anyone seeking to ask a question, put their name and address into the chat, and then either type out their question, or if they wanted to speak or be allowed to speak to the group, put that in the chat as well. And then I will be giving a little bit of priority to people who haven't spoken yet. Obviously, there's some new people who are just getting interested in this project, so we want to hear from them as well. But the intent is to try to hear from everybody, and we will try to get through questions as expediently as possible. So with that, Larry, are you queuing up the presentation? Or Tina, which one?
I think Tina has it poised, ready to go, but if Tina, you're having problems, I can certainly run it.
I have it ready.
Great.
Yeah, if you could queue it up, that'd be great.
Yep. Okay, everyone can see?
Yep.
Great.
So welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Quinlan, and I chair the Dale Street School Building Committee. I'm sure some of you have been attending some of these in the past, and some of you may have not. So what we're going to try to do is give a little bit of background for those who may be new to the project. And then we will walk through some of the decisions that have been made to date and some of the decisions that are upon us moving forward. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda for this evening. We'll do a quick summary of why the Dale Street School project. I won't spend a ton of time on that. Most people know the reasons why, but we will go into a little bit of depth there. And then we will walk through the preliminary design effort that occurred in the fall and into the winter of this year, moving through the spring and the development of alternatives on sites. And then we'll review costs, which I know a lot of people will have a lot of questions about, and it's a complicated topic, but we'll try to lay out for you as clearly as possible. And we'll talk about the building committee's decisions to date, where we stand, and then we'll talk about the next steps for how this project will move forward. And then we'll jump into the community feedback section. So that's our agenda for tonight. Next slide, please. So why the Dale Street project? Next slide, please. So I'm fairly certain most people in town are very familiar with this building. The original junior and senior high school for the town back in 1941 consists of the main classroom building as well as the auditorium building, which also serves as a gym. Subsequent to that, in 1969, the addition of the cafeteria wing, which has some classrooms and administrative space associated with it. And then in 2000, a modular classroom addition out back make up the three sections of the school. From an exterior perspective, there's significant degradation of the facade. There's visible damage due to rot and water infiltration. And that's pretty obvious if you take a walk around the building. The building does perform pretty poorly from a thermal performance perspective, drafty in the winter and not a lot of ventilation. The heating and cooling systems well beyond their useful life and being held together as best they can. The electrical system certainly not up to modern technology that are used in elementary schools these days. Also very important is the lack of accessibility and the lack of equal access for handicap and challenged children. And then maintenance and operating costs are also a key reason why this project was identified. The project actually was identified as a potential back in 2008. So it's not something that's new to the town. It's been on our radar for over 12 years now. Next slide, please. So that's the outside. The inside is even more important because this is where the school functions. And I'm going to let Steve Grenham chime in a little bit on the challenges that he faces in the day-to-day operation.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike said, my name is Steve Grenham, and I am the principal of the Dale Street School. I have been here. This is year number 6 in Medfield, and what a great community and a great school. Well, I love the certain aesthetics of the building that are here. I will be honest that it presents many difficulties every day when we're here. Many of our classrooms are very low in square footage. These small classrooms restrict our flexible teaching mindset that we have here at Dale Street that we believe is best for students. Sounds, yes, the acoustic sounds from one room to another can often be heard loud and clear. I'll tell you a quick story that I was reading in a classroom just yesterday in a 4th grade classroom. In the 5th grade classroom that was right next door to me, I felt it was in the room with me. So while we love that enthusiasm and energy in the building, it's just tough going from classroom to classroom. Another area that's really tough, and you can see one of the pictures there, is from our music program. We have a very talented music staff and very talented musicians, you know, within our school and within our district. I think that if you came into the school, they use every nook and cranny that they can in order to find a space to practice. Number one, some of them are in the foyer area out by the pillars, while another group is just inside in the hallways. And unfortunately, without the space, the instruments are kind of strewn throughout the hallways, and you can see it there in the cafeteria as well. I will say to you, though, that are the current students at Dale Street receiving a fantastic education? Absolutely. I can say without hesitation. You know, the teachers and the students do the most incredible job extending rooms, making spaces, getting outside when they can. However, it's just not ideal for our amazing teachers when we're looking to do our 21st century education and getting into project-based learning, something that was a little bit bigger, that had more spaces to meet the various needs of our students, would definitely, you know, allow our students to get to new heights, as well as something that our teachers have really been clamoring for many years.
Next slide, please.
So one of the things here is, you know, the Dale Street, I love the pictures that are up there. So if I can brag for just a second, you know, the students and staff at Dale Street are the absolute best. They work so incredibly hard to create that energetic and exciting, you know, environment that many of you have experienced if you walk through here or if you've had students that go through here. So let me take you through a typical day. You know, when the kids get to school, they basically have a homeroom teacher, which is kind of traditional elementary school, where they go in, they're doing morning routines. They have some SEL activities that they're doing when they're in class. In the morning hours, they're, you know, sometimes moving throughout the building to get the specials in a traditional year, not so much this year, but in a traditional year. And then lunch and recess. And then they also have kind of a similar schedule in the afternoon. Our teachers are really trying to integrate in all the subject matter. And as you can imagine, in today's day and age with the science and technology, a lot of our stuff stems in around engineering and problem solving, and trying to really have our kids be problem solvers rather than Jeopardy fact solution people. So when they do that, we do all that in coordination with what you can see up on the top left as our core values. And we have 4 at Dale Street: respect, compassion, collaboration, and continuous growth. And one of the things that awes me by the teachers and staff that work here every day is the continuous growth and how to continue to deliver a better curriculum, a better instruction to our students. They do an amazing job. You know, some of those small square footage rooms, they're in every crevice of those rooms. They use the cafeteria when it's not being used. They're out in the hallways. They're really just trying to get them to that small group collaboration, and the teachers as more facilitators than the lecturers maybe some of us had when we were in elementary school. But you know what? It is such an amazing, amazing place. I've worked in a few other places. It is none like any that is here. And I love the idea of the 1941. A few years ago, I had a gentleman come to the Memorial Day project that we had here at school. And he was a graduate of Medfield High School and took home economics in one of our 4th grade rooms. He was 91 years old. So I love giving the tours for that. But I really just feel, after working with this group, it's just amazing to think about where we could get to the next level with all of our education for our kids. Our kids deserve that. Our teachers deserve that. And really looking to continue the stages of what we're doing here at our school.
If I could just expound on that as well. I'm Jeff Marsden, the superintendent of schools. You know, on that slide, you also see Medfield 2021. So in the 2015-2016 school year, we embarked on a strategic plan initiative. The school committee and I did that. And one of the most important things that we did was go out into the community and try to get a sense of where people were at. We did focus groups. We did a survey. Our survey had over 700 respondents. And one of the key pieces that came out to the focus groups in the survey is, when are we getting a new Dale Street school? So you'll see that on the slide. We focused on collaborative learning, well-being, the whole child community, but facilities and equipment really came through as something that the community wanted. In a new Dale Street school, as one person said back then in 2015, I feel like I've been hearing we're getting a new Dale Street school for 10 years. When is it happening? So I think that, we're excited about this project and this process. We've been working on it for, almost 3 years now. It's starting with the statement of interest with MSBA and now getting into this feasibility study. So we're excited to share the information with you. Next slide, please.
So who has been taking the leadership role in this? This is basically the makeup of the school building committee. And for those who aren't familiar, the town partners with the state organization called the Massachusetts School Building Authority on these projects. And they in return provide funding and grants as long as we participate through their process, as they help communities all over the state build schools with assistance that gets funded through sales tax. So they have very specific requirements and require a diverse set of roles for the school building committee makeup. And that's why you'll see here, it's made up of the entire permanent planning and building committee, of which I chair as well. That consists of myself, Tom Erb, Mike Weber, Walt Kincaid, and Tim Bonfatti. We have 2 members of the school committee, Leo Brem and Anna Mae O'Sheabrook. We have members of the school district and Dr. Marsden, Principal Grenham, and Mike LaFrancesca, who's the Director of Finance and Operations for the district. We have representation from the Board of Selectmen, as Mike Marcucci. We have a member of the Warrant Committee who represents our finance committee in town. They look over, make sure they're aware of all budgets and make sure we're making sound financial decisions. And then town administration, we have our town administrator, Kristine Trierweiler, and Amy Colleran, our director of facilities. We also ventured into contracts for an owner's project manager in left field and our design team from Arrow Street, who you will meet shortly. Next slide, please. So at this point, I am going to hand it over to Arrow Street, who will walk you through some of the design process that we've embarked on so far.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Emily Grandstaff-Rice. I'm an architect and I focus on the educational visioning. I've been on the project since we were awarded the project last November. So I just want to walk through sort of what the first processes were in terms of engaging the community and also educational visioning, because that's really what starts any process like this. So on December 9th, we had our first educational visioning community forum when we looked at sort of the big picture. What are the priority goals? Where do we want to go from here? And what does learning look like in the future? Then we had 3 subsequent meetings on January 7th, January 28th, and February 4th, refining some of these ideas, looking at different prototypes and examples of what it is, also learning more about what does it mean to be
Oh, did we lose Emily?
We may have.
All right. Maybe Larry, you can take over, see if she can jump back in. Oh.
Oop. Emily, you're back.
We lost you for a minute there.
Emily,
oh,
you
I'm
might
so sorry.
you might turn off your video if you're having bandwidth trouble.
I might do that so you guys can hear my voice. Hopefully my teenager stops playing Fortnite. So we came together as a community on February 4th, really to look at the principles. And I want to point out the 6 guiding principles that are quite important. Looking at small learning communities. So how can students get a sense of individual education, but also be part of a larger community? The school is a community resource. This is not just Dale Street, but this is something that Medfield can use. Flexible, adaptable spaces. This is critical in 21st century learning. Real world and brain-based learning. So how can we use the spaces like Principal Grenham spoke about, connections to nature. In other words, not just having interior classrooms, but also getting kids outside, which is, ironically very important these days as well, and sustainability. So two points I want to make there: building as a teaching tool, but also making sure that we have the healthiest type of school that our kids would be in. And on the next slide, you'll see some touch points on our community forums to date. So as I spoke about, the December 9th community forum, the February 4th community forum, there's also been subsequent community forums on March 9th and May 19th, specifically to talk about some of the guiding principles that came out of the educational plan, but a choice that we had at hand, right? Whether this Dale Street project was going to be grades 3 through 5 or 4 through 5. A decision has now subsequently been made that it's going to stay at grades 4 through 5. And then the school committee, who's joining us tonight, also had a community forum to talk specifically about the grade configuration and also project updates. All of these meetings have had public engagement. Ironically, there's probably been more public engagement since everyone went virtual post-March, which has been fantastic, as well as the ongoing school building committee meetings, which are of course always open to the public, school building committee meetings, but also subcommittee meetings. And at each one of them, there has been public input taken. And so Larry, why don't you take the next site slide?
Yeah, sure. And good evening, everyone. I'm Larry Spang, also with Arrow Street, the architects for the project. And we've been, as Emily mentioned, working really since November, helping to guide things that I'm sure many of you have heard me speak before. Concurrent with the educational programming that Emily was leading, we looked at alternate sites for the school. And just to kind of remind folks, we started with 6 sites that were owned by the town and did a review of all 6 sites to figure out what would make sense as potential sites for a new school, and really focused pretty quickly on the 2 that are in front of us at this point. The Dale Street, which is shown on that upper right slide, the existing Dale Street site, which is between Dale Street and Memorial School. And then on the lower slide is the Wheelock School site over on Elm Street. And I think everybody's familiar with them. One thing we did want to mention is the substantial size difference. The Dale Street site is about 17 acres and the Wheelock site is about 44 acres. If you go to the next one, Tina. What we wanted to do is show the alternatives. Many of you have seen our presentations before. We did a robust series of studies of both sites, as well as alternates for the both the school layout and grade level configuration. For the purposes of tonight's discussion, we are focusing on the grade 4 through 5, because really that's been the focus of the project since the school committee decided back in August to focus on a 4 through 5 configuration. So if you go to the next slide. Excuse me, and one of the first ones we wanted to look at, and this is required by the MSBA, so it answers questions that people may have. Looking at what's known as a base repair scheme. What would it take to fix the existing building we have and continue to work that in service? And so we studied that. It doesn't address really any of the educational shortfalls of the existing buildings that Steve Grenham had mentioned, but really it's fixing the building systems and so forth. And again, that's required by the MSBA, and we do that as part of the standard process. Next, please. We then looked at a ad reno scheme, an addition renovation of the existing Dale Street building. What we looked at there was adding roughly 2/3 to the existing 1941 building due to a number of limitations. The 1961 cafeteria addition, 1969 cafeteria addition, does not seem to make sense to try and repurpose that. So assuming that we would remove that and then build a new, substantially new school for 2/3 of the school, and then about a third of it would be a renovation, thorough renovation of the 1941 building. What we're showing there towards the rear of the building is a new classroom wing. We would build new classrooms and then move the students in there and then come back and renovate the existing building and build a new gymnasium and cafeteria. And if you go to the next slide, you can see we prepared preliminary plans, which are those two upper diagrams showing how the school would lay out in the existing building and the new additions. And then along the lower bottom there is showing the phasing process. So again, we would start with building a new classroom wing. Once that was constructed, we would then move the students in there and then renovate the existing classroom wing and build a new gymnasium and cafeteria. And that our estimation is that's about a 30 to 36 month process, because really you're essentially doing two construction periods where you're building half of the building and then you're coming back and building the other half and stitching the two back together again. Next slide. We also looked at Dale Street, two alternates for new construction, both of which are intended to build new and retain a portion of the 1941 building. This particular one looked at providing a large driveway down essentially the rear of the site and trying to pull the building close to Adams Street and near to the Memorial Street building, allowing cars to go in the back, and then using either side of the new building for outdoor recreation, play spaces, and things like that. If you go to the next slide, and you can see here is the study, the layouts, the main community portions of the buildings are shown to the right there, the gymnasium to the front, cafeteria to the back, sort of a center entrance to administrative spaces, and then classrooms in that blue bar towards the left of the building. And again, pick up and drop off in the back and buses along the front. And then we looked at, if you go to the next slide, we also looked at an alternate layout of that, trying not to provide a long driveway around the back, but really to use as much of the space in a site for for the building itself and the spaces around the building. So this has a more of a community-oriented activities, and by that I mean the gymnasium, cafeteria, library, and those things towards the front of the building facing Adams Street, and then the classrooms towards the rear of the building. In both new building construction schemes, we were assuming the 1969 classroom wing would be removed, and we would repurpose that space for circulation or other outdoor activities, and the rest of the 1941 building would remain and be repurposed by the town. If you go to the next slide. And there's the plan layout. As you can see, there's sort of two parts to the building, some of which we were starting to look at how does the actual building itself operate. One opportunity with this sort of layout is the front of the building can be a nights and weekend activity, really a community space. And then the rear of the building, you can close off for classrooms for so people aren't wandering around there after hours. If you go to the next slide. We again looked at two new build scenarios for the Wheelock site. What you see there in the foreground is the existing Wheelock school building, and looking at putting a building essentially behind that, but trying to link the two together with the various site activities, creating some shared play spaces and other activities, as well as a new bus drop-off, a single bus drop-off that would serve both buildings, and then having separate private vehicle pickup and drop-offs for each of the two different Wheelock and the Dale Street buildings. If you go to the next. And you can see here the site plan, again, just building the building behind the existing Wheelock. The nice thing about this site is that it's relatively self-contained. We think the construction activities can happen pretty cleanly without too much impact on the existing Wheelock activities, in essence providing a construction barrier and then eventually knitting the site work back between the two buildings during the summer months. And then if you go to the next one. Finally, we looked at a scheme that was a little closer to the existing wheelock, seeing what that would do in terms of creating some educational spaces, to see whether that had any potentials for a different way. So if you go to the next slide. And again, you can see the new building in color shown near the existing wheelock building. We felt in some ways this was a little tighter, a little harder to manage construction without impacting the wheelock school, as well as then made the bus loop a little bit less accessible for both buildings. But we've looked at all of these alternates. We've done what we call building description narratives, which is really sort of describing the work. And then we have done detailed cost estimates. We had two estimators look at both looking at and doing independent estimates. Then we reconciled the estimates. So we have done a thorough investigation of the costs associated with all 6 of these alternatives. And I think with that, we'll jump into costs.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Yes. And so what you see here is a little more detail than folks may be used to seeing, but we did want to address the questions folks have on cost. We have, for the purposes of this presentation, removed again the grade 3 through 5 configuration. So we've got the 6 schemes that we were just talking about along the top there. Base repair is in green, just to separate it out from the others, the Dale Street, the Ad Reno new construction, and Wheelock new construction. And just showing the buildup of costs. These are from the estimates looking at the construction and renovation costs, site work, site improvements, which is related to the work around the Wheelock building, demolition of some of the pieces of the 1969 addition, some abatement and phasing costs, and those come to a subtotal that is along the bottom there, ranging from the very low of the base repair scheme to somewhere in the low 40s. We then are adding design and construction escalation, general conditions, and also carrying an allowance for a construction manager at risk, which is line M CMR at 5%. So again, and that's all for further investigation, whether we proceed on that basis. That gives us our projected construction cost, total construction cost. We are, for the Wheelock site, given some of the discussions to date, carrying 2 additional off-site improvement allowances to replace the water main and do some traffic improvements at Elm and South Street. And adding those in, we get an estimated project cost, which includes all of the work that you're seeing for that. And what you see there essentially is at the moment, and again, these are conceptual estimates, more for comparison's sake than necessarily for saying that these are where your project is going to end up. But you can
And
see
I would also add, Larry, just
yeah,
that
go ahead.
there's, and I know we're going to get into it in some other slides, but just as a frame of reference while we're on this slide, that there are still some decisions to be made about things that are optional that the town may choose to pursue. And whether it's things regarding sustainability and net zero pursuits or field replacements, things like that, that we'll get into in the alternates. But to your point, Larry, this is really about comparing in orders of magnitude the different options, not necessarily looking at a single dollar value and saying that when we come to the town next fall, that this is exactly what it's going to cost. A lot can change between now and then, but this is the best way we can compare the options when estimating.
Right. And just to follow up on that, there's a lot of work to do in terms of design studies, investigations, analysis, all of that. Certainly the construction market is moving all the time, and we're doing our best to sort of estimate all that. So this is a bit of a snapshot in time, and again, best used for comparison purposes, not necessarily to say this is the final cost of the project in a few years. But as you can see there, we're estimating the Ad Reno scheme at about 80.4 million. The new construction is ranging between 72 million and 72.3 million. And then the new construction over on Wheelock is ranging between 76.3 and 77.3. There's a little variation in each, again, based on the site and the particulars of those schemes. If you go to the next slide. As Mike has mentioned, there's a number of alternates that we have been talking about, are not necessarily decided on yet, and wanted to, again, present those to folks so that you know many of these will be further evaluated in the schematic design phase in the spring and decided whether or not to include in the project. Those range from the types of mechanical systems, in particular a geothermal system, which would help us if we were trying to get to a very low energy performing building, and is part of the town's discussion about net zero and sustainability. Depending on how much of the existing Dale Street building we want to remove, either the classroom or the entire building. We've done some studies on that. There was some field replacements and irrigations and additional parking. We also wanted to understand some pricing on. And then finally, if we indeed turn over the existing Dale Street building to the town, is there an idea that the building might be mothballed? We're not sure yet. Obviously, the town hasn't made any decisions there, but we wanted to capture potential costs there if we were to say we're going to close that building up, as well as do abatement in the entire building if we were not impacting it. Particularly in this case, if we were to build at Wheelock, we would not necessarily need to do any abatement in the Dale Street building. If you go to the next slide. And of course, the big question on all of these projects is how much is the MSBA willing to reimburse the town for? It's a pretty complicated process with them. We of course have to go through and prove the amount of work we're doing, the scope and the budget for our proposed project. They have to go through and evaluate that, understand if they agree with that. And then they run it through their process. They pay a certain amount per square feet. They pay a certain amount, 8% for site costs, and then a certain amount is reimbursed on your reimbursement rate. At the moment, this is our best understanding and estimate of how much they would contribute towards the project, ranging somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 million for the new build and potentially up to $20 million for the ad reno. Part of that, it's a slightly larger building because it's an ad reno, and there's also some incentive points that they give. And running those through the mix, you can see at the bottom there, estimated project cost to Medfield. The ad reno is about just under $60 million. The new builds on Dale are roughly 55 million. And the Wheelock site is, again, just under 60 million. So all within a reasonably comparable range.
But I do want to notice, Larry, that these are estimates, and there's a lot of work that needs to go in
Yes.
to get these numbers finalized.
Yes, absolutely. And the more times we say that, the better, because really there's a lot of numbers that will come over time as we develop the project.
I will
next
say
slide.
that we began with a 39.84% reimbursement from MSBA, but based on the site caps of 8% that they'll participate in, as well as the cost per square foot for construction, that's why these numbers are much lower than the 39.84%. These are conservative in terms of what MSBA will actually participate in reimbursing. However, as we further refine the projects, our intent is to try to maximize MSBA reimbursement and see these numbers increase as we develop the project further.
So I also wanted to throw this slide up there. As many of you know, Tim Bonfatti and I work for Compass Project Management. We manage elementary schools construction across the state. We also have some members of the building committee who build, and Mike Weber and Walt Kincaid, who are builders that build elementary schools all over the state. And then I wanted just to give a quick comparison of some other schools that are in the system, just to show the community sort of where we stand and how we compare to some other towns that are recently in the same pipeline. Most of these projects are ahead of us or slightly ahead of us, but it gives you a frame of reference for how much elementary schools cost these days. The Acton Boxborough project you can see is below by a good amount, but they are just about to start construction. That's one of Arrow Street's projects. So there's a reason why the other projects, which are not quite at the same stage, or a little bit further behind, are coming in higher, and that has to do with escalation and with contingencies and things like that. So some of these numbers are conservative because it's so early in the process. So where you see Wellesley, Medfield, Westwood all at the PSR stage, which is where we are now, it's still relatively early in the process. So we are still maintaining contingencies for escalation and contingencies for the fact that the design hasn't evolved to a point where we have a lot of detail. And so that's why some of those numbers are conservative. But what you can see here is that relative to all of those other elementary schools, that we are below that by a good amount. One reason for that is we have not decided as of yet to pursue a net zero ready building, which would basically put us into the ground source heat pump mechanical system that we talked about. But even if we were to add that to these projects, that would add $17 a square foot, roughly. That would still put us in the same range as other towns that have chosen to go that route, including my own client in Ashland, another client of ours in Westwood, and then the Westwood Fales Elementary School project, which is close to bidding right now. But you can see that we fall well within the range of how schools are coming out from a price perspective. Next slide. What's that going to mean to you? This is always an important question for everybody, is what's it going to mean for my wallet when if this project does get approved? And so we did a quick estimate. Again, we don't have final numbers, but we are working off of the numbers we have to date. And I still feel being fairly conservative. We're carrying a 30-year bond at 3%. I know one of the towns we work with just bonded their school at 1.75. So, it depends a lot on our bond rating and all those other things, but I still think that that's a fairly comfortable number. And if that were the case, and hopefully we end up below that, it means it's about $1.32 per $1,000 of valuation. So what does that mean? The average house in Medfield right now is valued at, or assessed value is $675,000, give or take, which means that house would see in the first year an $850 to $900 increase due to this project. There are other things that we'll talk about in a bit that help decrease that, other debt coming off the books, but just specific to this project, if we chose the recommended selection, this gives you a frame of reference based on whatever your home value is of what the tax impact would be in the first year. I should also note that that decreases over time based on a level debt payoff. So each year it would decrease over the course of the 30-year term of the bond issue. Next slide, please. So what I did is I modeled two different scenarios, and it basically gave us sort of the top end and the low end, just to compare the two of the projects, where the ad reno and the option G1 are approximately a $60 million cost to the town, versus a new build that ends up in the range of the $55 million range at a new build on the field at Dale. And then the other thing that people have been interested in is what other capital projects are on the horizon that will impact the taxes that we pay. And while they haven't been approved, what I did include here is the water treatment plant. And I should note that that does get paid out of the enterprise fund, which means it comes out of your water and sewer bills. So it's not necessarily sort of a one-to-one like a debt exclusion vote like this will be. But it just gives you a frame of reference of how that will compare. And then that's the yellow for the water treatment. And then Parks and Rec is something that's also been on the radar for a while. And again, we know that these haven't been voted as official, but just as a frame of reference of where, if those were to be approved, we just estimated Parks and Rec at 15 million. We haven't done enough study to really know where that would come out, but I think that that would be a fair range should that project proceed. And then at the bottom, the dark blue is really, you see how our current debt is our existing debt and how that tapers off over time. So you can see that if we borrow the funds for this project in 2022, you know, there's already been from 2020, there's been an almost $1 million decrease per year in debt service. And then if you go to the next slide, the difference between the 55 and then the $60 million bond, you can see the difference is slight there, and that the difference between these two options is about $300,000 in debt service per year. So going with a project that's on the more expensive side, the $5 million more, amounts to about a $300,000 per year debt service to the town. So in the grand scheme of things, it's out of the, you know, $7 or $8 million in debt service will be just under $8 million we'd be paying. It's down around, I believe, 4 or 5%. Next slide. All right, so in reviewing just a little past history of where we are. Next slide, please. So some really important decisions that have been made to date in terms of the school committee, school building committee, and then ultimately the Board of Selectmen will make their decision as well. But one of the keys was early on in the project, we had been exploring a grades 3 to 5 configuration, which would add an additional grade to the replacement of the Dale Street School. And there were a lot of good reasons to do that. But when COVID hit and the whole world kind of changed, we took a step back and I believe the school building committee and the school committee, Dr. Marsden's recommendation was to not bite off more than we could chew right now, because we were looking at basically a $95 million project as opposed to an $80 million project. So that alone reduced the cost of these options by about $15 million. And ultimately, it's a little bit easier and it's a little less change for people. So I think that was a smart decision. Then on the site selection, so the school building committee spent a lot of time evaluating the two sites and the different options on each site. We factored in all sorts of different inputs, whether it was teacher collaboration, student well-being, future flexibility, the educational benefits, the use of outdoor spaces, traffic. All of those things were considered and will continue to be considered moving forward. But ultimately, the school building committee did vote to recommend to the Board of Selectmen the selection of option G1 for a new build on the Wheelock site behind the existing Wheelock School. Next slide. This is probably easier if you take some time and print this out to read, but I wanted to be clear to people, especially people with younger kids who will see the benefit of this project. You know, sort of how will your younger ones be impacted? And basically there's two options. One is an ad reno option and one is a new build option. And what it does is it basically looks at where the class is now. So for instance, the pre-K class of 2034 entering this school year would stay at Memorial for K and 1, go to Wheelock for 2 and 3, and then they would be the first class to initiate a 4th grade in 2025-26, and in an ad reno option. The kindergartners would be pretty clear along the lines, but they would have to endure 1 year of that orange square where there would be a diminished existing building. Again, and this being an ad reno option, during different phases of the project, certain things would have to go offline, like the gym or the cafeteria, at certain times when kids may be in modular classrooms, et cetera, to be able to phase the project. So really, when you look at this chart and you're wondering about where your kids would fall, the orange zones, the 30 to 36 month duration of construction in an ad reno option, are where we really start to see impacts on the kids from an educational perspective, as they get sort of shuffled around between buildings and modulars, times when there's no cafeteria, et cetera. So that's certainly something to be concerned about, but it gives you a frame of reference. If you say, you know, my kid's in 2nd grade right now, then you can see during his 4th and 5th grade years, or her 4th and 5th grade years, they're going to be directly impacted by construction. Whereas the new build options basically are able to be more isolated and not necessarily disrupt the existing operations. But you can see again how your kids may be impacted. They'd certainly be impacted less during construction, much shorter window. And we also believe that one of the reasons the Wheelock site is helpful in that regard is because it's much easier to isolate that construction from the existing school, as opposed to being in the middle of Memorial and the existing Dale. Next slide. So what are our next steps? Next slide, please. I think this is an important graphic. Our original schedule had us, the key part to look at here, the phase we're in right now on feasibility study. The feasibility study was begun in the late fall of last year, and it was originally targeted to be complete in August of this year. But at multiple points in time, we've taken a step back and we've delayed the project. This is now our 3rd time delaying the project, to the point where now we are targeting a completion of the feasibility study in February at the MSBA board meeting. And you can see all the different dates and all the different times that we've pushed back and postponed at 3 different points to add essentially 6 months to the project. We're still waiting on final confirmation from the MSBA that they will approve of that. We have received, some feedback from one senior member of the MSBA, thinking that they would approve it, but we haven't gotten official response back from everybody. So that's going up the ladder. But we are proceeding as if we are approved to go with the 3rd delay in this process. And the key here is when we are looking at votes right now, we have gotten the school committee vote on grade configuration and the school building committee's vote on site selection. So now the next step is really the Board of Selectmen vote on the preferred solution. That November 3rd date hasn't really been vetted yet. We still have some other things to do. So that may push back a little bit. So don't take that as gospel just yet. But the plan right now is to submit the preferred schematic report at the end of December. And then that goes through a review period with the MSBA. And then the MSBA's board of directors would meet on February 11th to approve us to move into the next phase, which is called schematic design. Schematic design would then go through the spring and summer, and we would be looking at a fall town meeting, a special town meeting in the fall of 2021 to approve the funding for the project. Next slide. All right, so that's our presentation. We certainly have a lot more data, but we really want to hear from the community. As I noted in the beginning, please input your questions, your name and address into the Q&A. If you'd like to speak, please include include that request, but we do need your names and addresses. If they aren't on there, I'm not going to read the question. We do need to be able to keep this as much as possible through our normal procedures for public meetings. Before I do that, I guess I would open it up to the Board of Selectmen, the School Building Committee, or the School Committee to see if there are any questions from that group right now.
For the Board of Selectmen, I have no questions. Mike or Gus, do you guys have any questions?
Nope.
I don't have any questions at this point. Nope.
Anna May? Or Jess, rather. Sorry. Shift in leadership.
Yeah. Excellent timing on that. No, at this point, I mean, I think most of this information is information we've been reviewing for months and are very comfortable with, that there are a lot of options to the town, but our job is to really look at the educational benefit of the entire project. So I very much feel as though the School Building Committee has had a very thorough review of the town's interests. And I sincerely hope that we're able to kind of come to some level of consensus tonight with the town and allow people to have their questions answered. Thanks.
Anyone from the SBC? You guys have been in the thick of it, but see if you had any questions. All right. Not hearing any, I will jump over to question and answers. First up, I have Mr. Dan Foley from 45 Elm Street. Dan asks, have you done any traffic studies on the effect of South or Elm Street? How would access work to the water treatment facility in the back? And what is the number of parking at Wheelock now versus in the future? In terms of traffic studies, that's an excellent question and one I did want to discuss tonight. Ideally, we would have done one in the spring earlier on in this process, but COVID kind of killed that idea. We certainly couldn't get any real reliable data based off of a post-COVID condition in the springtime. Subsequent to that, we have been working, recognizing that traffic is a concern for the Elm Street neighborhood and the residents in that neighborhood. And we did have a conversation with the traffic engineer who's more confident that we're at least approaching similar levels of existing traffic that we had towards the late 2019. But we are going to be doing some traffic counts to sort of see what the condition is. We have a couple of traffic studies that were done in the past that we'll be comparing it to, just so we know from a factoring perspective, or are we seeing 90% of the traffic there was pre-COVID? Are we seeing 80% pre-COVID, just as a baseline? And then we'll be projecting out what that increase would mean for the school in terms of the added cars for staff and pickup and drop off. So that work will be done over the next couple of weeks. And we do plan on having a neighborhood forum with the Elm Street neighborhood to talk through what we've discovered and talk through your concerns about traffic. So that is in progress. I apologize that we couldn't get it done sooner, but unfortunately COVID hamstrung us. We are starting to see now the kids are back in school, some traffic to the schools. And interestingly enough, since there's not as much busing, the traffic has, even though there's only about 48 or 50% of kids in class on a singular day, we are seeing a lot more car traffic because we can't bus as many kids as we normally would. We do bus about 85 or 90% of our elementary school kids, which is a very high number, which does keep traffic down. So we will be looking at that in greater depth in the next few weeks. In terms of access to the water treatment facility in the back, that'll be maintained. It'll just be gated off further back along the parking lot so that the DPW can get back down there. Obviously, they're planning a water treatment facility there for approval by the town this spring. And so that access would not be hindered at all. And then the last question from Mr. Foley was, what is the number of parking at Wheelock now versus the future? I don't have that handy, Larry. Do you know how many parking spaces are being added?
Mike, I can answer that question. So currently, sorry, did you say at Dale or at Wheelock?
Wheelock.
At Wheelock, there's approximately 90 parking spaces, and we would be increasing that to at least meet the zoning bylaws, which is approximately 200, I want to say 242 in total.
Yeah, and there, as Tina's saying, so we are showing a fairly substantial increase in parking on the Wheelock site, and certainly could add more if people were feeling that way, but our basic target is to meet the zoning requirements.
All right, next question. All right, I have, I apologize if I butcher your name. Looks like Hilly Passes from 24 Marlin Road. She or he, I'm not sure, asks, I do not think it's fair to compare costs of the ad reno with the other versions, since the town would be left with the yet to be renovated 1941 building and all other versions. Has there been any discussion about future uses and renovation costs for the 1941 building? That renovation cost would presumably be another $20 million bill or so for the town down the road, and in a fair cost comparison should feature in the other design versions. So that's another key issue that we are looking at, is the disposition of the existing Dale Street School. There are multiple potential uses for it in its current condition, in a renovated condition, or there's a possibility it could be demolished altogether. That has not been decided, but I know that it's something that we have looked at. It's been reviewed as a potential option for Parks and Rec to get them out of an even more dilapidated FAF center. And there's been other things that have been on the radar. I was wondering, Mike Marcucci, would you want to chime in a little on this topic? I know you've had some thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate, Hilly, your question. Hello. I think, to me, and I said this for the Board of Selectmen meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think the fair carrying cost for the Dale Street building, if it is not resolved through one of these options, is the cost of demolition, because that's at a minimum what we would have to do. We don't have to renovate it. We'd only be renovating it and using it if the town has decided that it wants to use it for that purpose. So I don't think that we would choose to renovate that building and spend $20 million or $40 million to renovate the building unless we had a use for it. And that use would probably cost about the same. So whatever use arose for that building, whether it's new Parks and Rec, would arise just as well if we stayed at Dale. So if we stayed at Dale, renovated the building, and didn't have that issue, if we had a need for a $20 million building, we'd still have a need for a $20 million building. And so whether we need to replace the Parks and Rec building or not is really a function of how long the FAF Center lasts. And then it's a function of whether the town chooses to build a new Parks and Rec building, which I don't think is certainly not a guarantee. And at least one selectman has suggested that that should be funded by something other than the taxpayers. So it's a fair question. And I do think that when we think about that cost, it is the cost of demolition, because if we were going to spend more on it, we'd be spending more on it for an actual use to which we would put it. We wouldn't renovate it for no use. And I don't think we would spend more, for example, on a Parks and Rec building just because it was there. I think the town will value a new Parks and Rec building at a certain cost and a certain size and conclude that there's a certain amount we can afford. And if that's doable at the Dale location or using a partial renovation, we'll do it that way. But I don't see us having a higher appetite or recommending more spending just because that building is there. So I think it's a fair consideration for the cost. And I think with all, we'll get to this later, with all of these decisions, wherever we go, we do have to think about what are the other implications, what are we kind of locking ourselves into going forward with whatever choice we make. And so it's a good question. I also think that I don't know that that cost, whether it's 1.1 or 1.8 million. I'm not sure that's something that has to be bonded or paid for as part of this project. As some of you may know, we established 2 years ago a municipal building stabilization fund to fund maintenance of our existing buildings. And as part of that, developed a 20-year capital plan. That 20-year capital plan includes about $11 million in sort of repairs related to the existing Dale Street School, on the assumption that it was not going to be replaced. And so I would think that cost of that, whether it's demolition or mothballing, probably would be carried as part of that municipal building stabilization fund, that when the permanent planning and building committee members finish with this committee and go to update that 20-year plan with Amy Collar, and we'd add it. So it's not necessarily a new added tax cost. I think that is the fair comparison, but I don't think we're buying ourselves a mandate to renovate that building if we go to Wheelock.
Thanks, Mike. All right, let me see. I have a Steve Gannum from 1 Cross Street. What traffic studies have been completed with the scenario of the Wheelock School, in particular regarding the side streets off South Street, e.g. my street? As I noted, traffic studies are going to be ongoing in the next couple of weeks. We hope to share some more info with you shortly. And I do note that you had another question in here further down about, in addition to the increased amount of traffic that would occur at streets such as Cross, there also needs to be consideration for the lack of sidewalks. So the sidewalks, that's an easy fix. It's fairly easy. We would look at possible off-site improvements to ease that situation. Should we choose to select the Wheelock site. In terms of the additional traffic to Cross Street, that I think that'll be looked at from a perspective of what is the existing traffic. I know that you guys unfortunately see a lot of cut through traffic of people that want to get from the south side of town over to 109 by avoiding the middle school, high school. So that's certainly something that we're going to be looking at, is what is the existing condition and what will realistically be the increase, and where will it be coming from. So those types of things are certainly things we're going to be looking at. I'm sorry I don't have more information for you, but I know it's going to be probably our #1 priority in the next couple of weeks. All right. Bear with me here. So I have a Peggy Tyrell, 29 Eric Road. And Peggy asks, so when you compared our project per square foot cost to other towns, was that with all costs included, i.e. mothballing Dale or other costs associated with choosing the Wheelock site? No, it's basically a comparison of construction costs. That is basically how much is it costing other towns to build similar projects. I don't factor in their other carrying costs on other buildings that they are abandoning, nor would I did I include that comparison in ours. So it is apples to apples in that regard. It's based off of just the straight construction costs and not some of the ancillary costs associated with those projects or ours. All right. I have Lauren Zembron, 151 North Street. First of all, thank you to all who are dedicating time and energy to this process. I ask that you please keep in mind the ideal location of the existing Dale School. Its proximity to the downtown area allows kids to safely and quickly walk from school to the center of town. The current Dale location is closer than Wheelock to the growing number of affordable housing units in town. Keep Dale at Dale. Well, I appreciate your opinion on that. I think that that's something we did look at. It is a little bit further out of town, and to the committee at least, it was deemed that the benefits to that site outweighed the increase in the distance to downtown. I mean, everybody's going to have different opinions about if it's too far or if it's close. But we saw the educational benefits of being able to have less transitions in the elementary schools, to be able to have one campus where kids would go in elementary school for 4 years, as opposed to hopscotching back and forth from the Dale Memorial Site to Wheelock and back to Dale. That was, I know, a key factor in my thinking. But I guess not everybody agrees. All right. Sorry, bear with me. Sometimes the questions and the addresses don't go together here. Okay, I have a Hillary Zivan from 11 Elm Street. Hillary says, I have concern about the siting of the new school at Wheelock. The Wheelock site is situated between a railroad track on the south, swampland on the east, and has only Elm Street to access from South Street, Cross Street, and Phillip Street. Cross and Phillip are narrow, windy roads and currently cannot handle more traffic at rush hour, meaning opening and closing of school hours. Living on Elm Street, I watch the rush hour traffic on a daily basis, and it is intense right now. I cannot imagine how Elm Street can handle twice the number of students, staff, and parents coming and going without making an intolerable traffic jam twice daily for parents, buses, and those of us who live in the neighborhood. Have you considered the need to widen Cross, Phillip, and far end of Elm? The answer is no. Our goal is the opposite. The far end of Elm is certainly a very narrow road, but it's also, there's only about 24 houses before you're at the Walpole line. So any parents seeking to come to drop off their kids at this school, or the Wheelock school for that matter, it would be less than 24 houses. And assuming they all had kids, it would be a fairly mild increase. So the widening of Elm Street, or even Cross and Phillip for that matter, we don't see as being needed. The idea is to funnel the traffic back to South Street. And so we will be looking at evaluating the intersection at South and Elm to see if there's ways we can improve that to make sure that traffic flows smoothly. Obviously, recognizing that you do see rush hour traffic again cutting through that neighborhood, we can look at ways of using signage about no left turns onto Knollwood or no left turns onto Cross during pickup and drop off times. Obviously, that requires a bit of an enforcement portion to it from the police side, but there are ways to help control traffic through those neighborhoods. It's not to say that people won't ignore it, but I do know that does serve as a way for some people to cut through from even from Norfolk and Rentham that are cutting up through town to get to 128. All right. I have Catherine Thorpe from 115 South commenting on a question. Thank you all for everything you've done to help the town plan for new Dale Street School. Our family is 100% behind a new Dale, but we want that building to be at Dale Street. Thank you again. All right. And now I have it's like Catherine and Richard White from 9 Bridlefield Lane. Won't all Medfield citizens who come into Route 27 from South Street, Granite, Plain Street, Route 27 south of South Street, and the side streets be impacted by the traffic? I guess I'm not sure the question there. The traffic to the school, the change would be for a couple of years of people who are driving their kids to Dale instead of driving 4 grades worth of kids to the Dale site, the Dale Memorial site, and only 2 to Wheelock. We would be shifting to 2 grades of kids going to the memorial site and 4 grades going to the Wheelock site. So it's really kind of a shift in anyone who's dropping off by their parents, as opposed to the bus routes. The buses go to all elementary schools right now, so we would actually be reducing the number of drop-offs. We would have a single drop-off at Wheelock, and currently right now we have a drop-off at Wheelock, a drop-off at Dale, and a drop-off at Memorial. If we were to keep the project at Dale in its current configuration, we would still have 3 drop-offs on the bus. And I will say that in a non-COVID condition, we typically bus 85 to 90% of our kids, which does help with drop-off traffic. So assuming we get back to that, that would certainly be an improvement. But to some factor, we may end up having more drop-offs than we did pre-COVID. All right. All right. I have Kenton Doyle from 32 Oriole. Kenton asks, will the questions gathered through the SurveyMonkey survey that closed on Monday be reviewed during this community feedback segment? So the intent of that survey was really to sort of see if there's any new information, any new concerns, and then try to address it in the presentation. I hadn't planned on specifically going through each and every question in that. We can certainly, if you have a specific question that you wanted addressed, please plug it in here. Most of the concerns that were raised in those questions are ones that we've already discussed. The 3 keys to me are traffic concerns, cost concerns, and then the disposition of the Dale Street School should we choose to leave it with a new school at Wheelock. So those are kind of the 3 things that have always bubbled to the top, 3 main concerns. But if you have a specific question that you want me to address, I'm happy to do it. If you could plug it in here. But we did receive about 45 questions. But like I said, they seem to be central on those 3 themes that we just discussed. All right, I have a Dave Pucci from 38 Charlesdale Road. Hi, Pucci, how you doing? Good to hear from you. I'm hearing chatter about the increased cost of the Wheelock site option, and although 4 to 5 million sounds like a lot to the average person, aren't these costs really essentially the same at this stage in cost estimating process? What is the accuracy to cost estimates prepared at this point, plus or minus 30%? Question mark. So as I noted in the comparison of the 2, the Wheelock option is more expensive for a couple of reasons that I did want to discuss. One is obviously the water main we talked about and getting enough water pressure to the building. That is something that I'm fairly certain we will have to do. That alone is $1 million to run about 2,000 feet of replacement pipe. So that is something that does make a difference. The other areas where that site is different than Dale in that we will be doing some improvements to the Wheelock School, the second school on that site, which includes a new drop-off loop and new parking areas for that site to be able to function better. Currently, there are 4 driveways along the Wheelock frontage on Elm Street. We would reduce that to 2. So that would greatly reduce the amount of ins and outs into the site and help traffic flow a little bit better. It does come at a cost. Right now, the cost for the Wheelock improvements in terms of site improvements, we estimate to be around $2 million of that as well. So there definitely are some added costs. We are carrying $500,000 for off-site traffic improvements as a way of being conservative. We don't know what will be needed. It could be that much, it could be less. We estimate it'll probably be less because that's a fairly hefty number for traffic improvements. So we are being conservative and carrying the cost for those. In terms of the accuracy of the cost estimates right now, it's certainly not in the range of 30%, but really we are carrying things like contingencies and escalation for our estimate of where costs will be. And the closer we get to the day of bidding the project, the more accurate our numbers will be. But with the MSBA's process, we have to make a decision about funding at the end of schematic design. If this were to be a Medfield only municipal project, we would only be going to the town with hard bids. That's the way we've done it in the past, and it's far more accurate in that regard. But the MSBA process does work. They do factor in a lot of things, including their historical costs on other projects, and then escalation and things like that. So, as I noted, there's also things that may change in terms of scope, which are the alternates regarding sustainability, like geothermal, et cetera. So there are still things that will a lot of which will flesh out in the next phase in schematic design, so that we can come to the town in the fall with a project scope and budget that we're fairly confident, and we have to meet it. Once we set that budget, we want to make sure that we come in under it, as we've done on some other building projects. All right. Sorry, bear with me. All right. Kevin Stoddard, 6 Baker Road. Kevin asks, the building designs for new grade 3 to 4 construction, I think you mean 4 to 5, but are quite different at each location and even at each site. Do all designs allow for an optimal layout from an educator's viewpoint? We know that the SBC, the SB, and the selectmen all prefer the G1 schematic at Wheelock. If the decision is to put 4 or 5 at Dale, which schematic would you choose and why? What do you gain or lose from an education viewpoint at each site? I'd like to turn this one over, since I'm not an educator, to Jeff, and maybe Jeff, you can talk about the differences in the layout options, and Larry or Emily, if you want to chime in too.
Sure, Mike, thanks. I mean, I think the reason why we like G1 from educational standpoint was first of all, looking at the pause. We wanted to make sure that we could create these small communities of learning, because it is a larger school. So you're looking at 575 students in an elementary school, and how do you make that larger school feel small? And you do that through the design of the pods. And I think that's something that came out of all of our community visioning and all the visioning items that we had. People really wanted to make that a priority. So that was important for us. Outdoor learning continues to be an important piece for us. Of course, now with COVID, it's really important. But prior to that, there was a strong sense from the community and from the teachers that outdoor learning spaces were important. Certainly with 44 acres on the Wheelock site, you have a lot more outdoor space to use than the 17 when you're kind of squishing it on that Dale Street site, which really is what it feels like. You're squishing that on there. Looking at having the campus where you have those grade levels together, really important for us to look at transitions. Now, I know at the last public hearing we had, someone really minimized the transitions and the importance of that. I mean, I can show you through, what we did in our strategic plan. I can read it from a parent who said, I strongly believe that the non-neighborhood school model we have in Medfield in elementary levels results in too many transitions for our students, particularly for our students with special needs. Students have to adapt too many times to new cultures, norms, and schedules. I don't think this model is child-centered. And I think that was a really important piece that we were looking at. We wanted to make sure that we could get some sort of campus, and we thought the 3 to 5 was going to be a really good match for that. But when the prices came in, we knew that the 15 million was just too much to incur. And we were concerned a little bit about the projections with enrollment, because we weren't seeing the exact projection numbers that MSBA and NESDEC were telling us. So that transition piece is important. Teacher collaboration. I know that it was said last time that we don't have collaboration at the middle school and high school. Now we're on the same campus. Just not true. We have department chairs that work with both buildings, and there's a lot of collaboration that goes on between those buildings. In fact, we have some students that from the middle school that take courses up at the high school, and they transition back and forth. So again, just not an accurate statement around the collaboration piece. Shared staff is really important to us. Right now, we have 9 members, at least 9 members that we share among and between schools. Some at all elementary, some at the middle school as well. It makes life a lot easier, and certainly we can have additional programming and special education. We could share staff if we had that campus setting. That's a really important thing to us. And then looking at programming overall, if we have one campus with that much space, and we have increased science labs and STEM labs and STEAM labs that we have in the new building, we can really enhance the programming, that we can involve more kids in that and not just a solitary. As I said before at the last meeting, there's really no connection between grades 4 and 5 and pre-K 1. And to put it on that Dale Street site doesn't make a lot of educational sense. And you can't just say, well, let's take the kids at Wheelock and make that a 2-3 over at Memorial and switch those kids. Memorial was built for an early childhood center. It's sized, both classrooms, bathrooms, everything in between. It's sized for pre-K, K, and 1. That's why we really wanted to push to make that an early childhood center in the 3, 4, 5 scenario. So, I mean, I guess it just makes a lot of sense educationally for our kids to have it at the Wheelock site. And in the Dale site, you know, the real concern that we have there, whether it's especially the ad reno, you know, again, people minimize that by saying, well, my kids went through, you know, a high school or a middle school. You really can't minimize that unless you're a school administrator, teacher, or student and gone through it. It's not a great process. I went through it as a principal, and you know, there's a lot of safety issues, and it's not great when you're going to say to a kid, hey, listen, there's no cafeteria for you this year. There's no gym for you this year. And by the way, we don't have a playground either. It's just not fair. And quite frankly, the kids that are going to be impacted by that are really having a tough time right now, right? I mean, just add on to what they're going through now with a hybrid learning and remote learning. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to put you in a situation for your elementary years where you don't have space and programs that you should have as an elementary kid. So I can't say enough about why I think that the Wheelock is a much better site educationally. And, you know, I don't like the Dale Street schemes that are new builds because they're right up on Memorial, and that's not a great system either. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything else about that.
The only other thing
Hey,
I would,
Mike, this is Gus. I just wanted
Go ahead,
to make
Gus.
a quick comment about Kevin's question. You don't know that all the selectmen have preferred the G1 scheme. I think if we did, we probably would have had a vote on accepting the recommendation at our last meeting. I don't say that to imply that, at least speaking for myself, I have a different preference. But this whole process, I think, is intended to give the people of the town that have the interest a chance to voice their opinions, to make their case for alternatives. And at the very least, speaking for myself, I'm interested in hearing that. That's not to devalue the recommendations coming from the building committee or the professional opinions, just like the one that we just heard from Jeff. It's the point here is that we have not made that decision. So for those who are still trying to probe, you should know that we're still listening. You don't know where we come out on this yet. Thanks.
Larry or Emily, from a functional perspective and the ability to build a modern elementary school, anything you see from a comparative of the two sites?
Sure. Yeah, let me address that. And just for reference, Emily had to jump off to go to another evening meeting. So
no problem.
But nevertheless, I think it is important to think about the size of the site. There is a long way to go. Let me just start with that. There's a lot of design work between now and when we actually put a shovel in the ground. So these are initial ideas for the different sites. By no means do we consider these to be final design. So there's a lot of work to do. I do think fundamentally the Dale Street site is more constrained, particularly when you think about trying to maintain the existing school operations on two sides of a construction site if we're talking about new construction, and doing that in a way that tries to preserve as much of the outdoor spaces as those students would like to have during construction. So there's many moving parts, and as Jeff mentioned, that does have an impact, and we're seeing that on a number of our projects. We did look at a scheme where we tried to bring the traffic off of Adams Street and there hasn't been too much real discussion about the impact of traffic on Adams Street, but we looked at trying to put the traffic and the pickup and drop off on back. That was that first scheme we showed. What we found or felt was that pushes the building to the front towards Adams Street, and as Jeff mentioned, also towards Memorial, resulting in what is a fairly tall building fronting on the street there. And that was the difference between the two schemes. We looked at then saying, okay, let's use more of the land on the site for the building and the outdoor spaces and less for traffic and parking. So therefore, in the second of the two schemes, we were able to open it up and create a little more open space around it. But we're certainly trying to figure out how to tuck in the parking and the traffic along Adams Street. On the ad reno scheme, there are a lot of limitations to the existing building that we have to work with, and the phasing process that we also have to work with in terms of just sort of constraints on the design of the project. Particularly the classroom building that exists today, very much the way that's structured, sort of opening that up and creating the sort of neighborhood-based learning pods that Jeff was mentioning, the way kids can come out and do the sort of informal learning, project-based learning and other things like that. It's a little harder because the existing walls are bearing, and those are small corridors and tight classrooms, as many of those older school buildings are. On the Wheelock site, we certainly have more space, more elbow room to create the building that makes sense for the community. We did look at sort of pulling it a little closer, and I think there's some fine tuning there, but there's certainly far less constraints on Wheelock than on Dale Street.
Thanks, Larry. All right, bear with me here. All right, I have a question from Robert Eigler of 32 Elm. Robert asks if either the Dale option or the Elm Street option provides an equivalent educational experience. Why should the town incur between $4 and $5 million additional cost in choosing Wheelock? What mitigants to the additional parking would be provided to the neighborhood? I think you know, our last answer was part of that, there's additional benefits towards the Wheelock School at Elm Street that's part of that increase in costs, as well as increase in infrastructure for the water line and potentially some traffic mitigations. In terms of the parking, I know that's been a complaint of a lot of Elm Street residents, especially on weekends when there are large soccer tournaments and things like that. What I can say is all of that additional parking helps that situation because it would keep those cars from spilling down Elm Street on those types of occasions. So the idea is to try to keep those cars out of your neighborhood as much as possible, as opposed to just having them, you know, park on the grass and spill off the curbs into the neighborhood. All right, I have a Kimberly Schubert. Kimberly says, I support having the school be net zero since it will help set the Medfield in a direction to address climate change. The cost of geothermal did not show the long-term savings from increased energy efficiency. Could you elaborate on how the decision on whether net zero is pursued will unfold and what is known at this time about cost savings? This is a great question. Again, so many elementary school projects and high school, middle school projects that run through the MSBA system are exploring what's called net zero or net zero ready buildings. What that basically means is we build buildings to be highly efficient energy wise and energy consumption wise. And typically the way that is done is to go to all electric systems and avoid fossil fuel based systems. Typically in New England, the best way to do that is to use what's called a ground source heat pump to be able to heat and cool the building. That type of system does require drilling some wells to be able to run fluid down into the ground that then becomes cooled or warmed, and heat is transferred from in the ground to in the building, or vice versa in the summertime. I'm not an engineer, so I'm sure there are people that know a lot more about it than I do, but I do know the basics. It does cost more, as we noted in the alternate slide, but you're absolutely right. There is some cost savings. That decision will be made during the next phase, because we need to have selected a site and we need to have an option so that we can really do an energy model and understand how the building will function from an energy consumption perspective. So that is going to be a heavy focus of the schematic design phase. We'll be getting to decisions about those systems. And as you've alluded to here, sometimes that means spending some money up front for savings in energy consumption in the future. So all of that stuff will be modeled during the next phase, but it is on our radar, which is why it was included in all the alternates to date. Ultimately, the SBC won't be deciding on that. We'll be advising the Board of Selectmen on what the additional costs would be, along with the Medfield Energy Committee, and then the Board of Selectmen will decide whether it's worth pursuing that from a policy perspective for the town. All right. Next up, I have Tracy Davignon, 3 Jade Walk. How confident are you in the class size projections, and how does that impact the site choice? Also, is it fair to say the Dale Street site at 17 acres is too small to adequately serve the needs of all? If projections are off and we stay at smaller numbers, would this change anyone's mind on the committee on the site selection? I can't speak for the entire committee. They can certainly speak for themselves. I can tell you the class size projections, the MSBA goes through an extensive process. They stand behind those 100%. I'm not going to lie, I thought they were high to me when I first saw them. However, I'm not a demographer, and they are standing by those projections. Should those not become reality, the town certainly has flexibility, whether it's spreading kids out more and reducing class sizes, but still utilizing all the classrooms, or utilizing the same class sizes and just not using a classroom or using it for another function. There's different ways that the town can be flexible in that regard. But that would be something that would have to go through really the education side of the town, through the school committee and the district. But in terms of if they're off turns out that they do become reality, or even growth, say, State Hospital or some other developments become, we start to see more growth than expected, then the MSBA does require every project to have a plan for 15% growth in the project. And so it's required of all options. What I can say is that on the Dale Street site, any sort of growth, if a new build option was chosen on that site, any sort of growth would be really challenging, because that building, that campus would be just so dense. The ad reno option at Dale Street would allow for one field to remain in its current configuration, but that field would have to be eaten into if we did see a surge and had to go down a path of growing that school.
Mike, can I address this as well? Thanks.
Absolutely.
And hello to Tracy. Just a couple of points on this, and this is something that I've brought up at SBC meetings and Board of Selectmen meetings. I like Mike, probably more so than Mike, am a skeptic of those projections, and I don't anticipate that they will come to pass in the time period that they're being, within the window that is currently being projected. Now, whether they come to pass at some point during the 50 to 75 year life of this building, I'm a lot less confident in my skepticism than that. I don't think, and so I've thought about this and the location under both scenarios. So what happens if it does come to pass and we've built a Dale? or what happens if it doesn't come to pass and we built the Dale, and vice versa for Wheelock. And my own view is that, and someone raised a question in the Q&A about the Wheelock building, which is a good one, and it relates to this, is that, given the larger size of the Wheelock site, one of the advantages that we have is if the projections do not meet what the MSBA has set forth, the building that we're building is probably big enough to be a 3-4-5 school. There's room for enough students at our current enrollment to make it a 3-4-5 school. And if it's built at the Wheelock site, I think we would have an option when the Wheelock building comes due. And just for perspective, Wheelock was built, I believe, in 1969. Blake and the high school were also built in the 1960s, and they were both comprehensively renovated in 2001 to 2003, about 40 years after they were built. So, Wheelock is going to be the next school that we'll likely have to deal with. I do think that if we do build at Dale, we are committing to building a replacement for Wheelock someplace else. I do not think the Dale site, to Mike's point, is large enough that if, for example, enrollment stayed where it is, and we thought we could consolidate to 2 elementary schools. In other words, if there was an option to put an addition onto Memorial in lieu of building an entirely new school, that would seem to be an option if this elementary school is built at Wheelock. I don't think it's an option under any of the scenarios at Dale, just given the size of that site. And so that has been a factor in my analysis here. And again, it's not necessarily wrong to decide that we're going to keep Dale where it is, but we do have to be clear-headed about it. The likelihood is when Wheelock comes due, the best option we're going to have is to replace that school. Now, the projections may differ, the cost may be different, but you're expecting that the cost of that school would be about the same as the cost of this school we're talking about here, the new school options. And that would most likely come to pass within the 30 years of that we're paying for these bonds. And so I think, to Tracy, to your question, if that doesn't come to pass, I would hope that rather than departing from the current standards of class sizes, that the school committee would look very seriously, and that the voters of Medfield and taxpayers of Medfield would hold them to this as well, at going with what they think is the preferred education, what they think is their preferred educational setup, which would be 3-4-5. I think the Wheelock site could bear that number of kids. I don't think the Dale Street School could. So I think there may be a situation, if you built at Dale, given the size of the school, if the projections don't come to pass, in the next 10 years, which is the time frame for the projections, that you'll either have empty classrooms or you'll have a push for smaller classes, hiring additional teachers to just fill the space, because I don't think you'd be putting that many kids on the Dale Street site. And certainly not if we do hit those enrollment projections, because obviously the size of the school that we build doesn't affect the number of kids who are in the school system. So it's not like building 1,000 new houses that are then going to be populated. Our school enrollment really is going to be what it's going to be, and it's either going to be enough to fill the school or not. And so it's not as though if you build it, they will come, that they're going to come one way or not come, either way. So I think it's a longer answer than maybe Tracy was looking for, but I think that's kind of my thinking about how this plays out in the long term and what decisions we will be locked into, or mostly locked into, depending on what we decide to do here.
Thanks, Mike. All right. My next question is from Bill Massaro, Evergreen Way. Bill says, what is the rush to incur more town debt and increase residents' tax burden, given the continuing uncertainty about COVID-19 resurgence or potential new strains, and the ongoing debate on full-time classroom instruction versus virtual learning versus hybrid split? I don't know that I would classify this as a rush personally, considering this project's been on the radar for 12 years. It's not lost on us that this is a significant project. It'll be the single most expensive project this town has ever embarked on. But it is something that is needed for the town. The building just is not capable of providing the level of service that it needs in order to keep our kids educated in the way that we expect. I mean, the Medfield school system is certainly something that does a lot with a little, but there comes a point where you're battling uphill, and the school is really becoming a thorn in the side of the educators. Certainly many portions of it were not kept up to the level that they could have been, leading to this, the need here. In terms of how COVID relates to this, the current thinking is that it's more of a short-term effect than a long-term effect. I don't know anyone who's come out with any studies or any theories that we should somehow plan for future buildings to have half the size of class because they're going to be going hybrid. I guess I would look to Jeff to see if he had any thoughts on the future of instruction in elementary schools and how that might impact the design of this project.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think there really isn't a lot on what we're going to do in terms of hybrid, split week, or virtual learning, or any of that. I think that the assumption that we're all making is that at this time next year, we'll be very close to being back to normal, and we'll be able to institute some of the great instructional practices our teachers have done, throughout the entire time they've been in Medfield. So I think, there really isn't anything coming out of it. I've talked to members of the Board of Health that say that they, expect this time next year that healthcare workers and elderly would be having the vaccine, and that would, facilitate us going back to school at a regular schedule. So, yeah, nothing in terms of design. I don't know if Larry has anything with design at all, but we haven't had any conversations around that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think certainly what you're seeing now with families trying to juggle kids at home and workloads and other things, certainly, I think everybody believes that kids in a school setting is desirable and would go back there. Many families would go back there in a heartbeat if they could figure out how to do it. We haven't received any guidance from the MSBA, which is sort of one of the touch points on this issue for us. Like all of us, they're assuming that this too will pass and that we will be back to what we would all consider some degree of normal, whether it's next year or shortly thereafter. We certainly hope it's soon. But I think, if you look at what is the things that families are struggling with in terms of home learning and virtual learning and all those sorts of things, everybody is, I think, beginning to, reappreciating what they always thought of their schools. They're just appreciating it more when they try to become teachers at home.
Larry, I would also add too that space is really one of the issues that's hurting us right now. So when we have a 6-foot physical distancing in our school, we can only fit 11, 12, 13 desks in a classroom right now in all of our schools. So the fact that more space would really be a godsend right now, because it allows us to do have a little more flexibility with our younger grades, but we just don't have the space when we have class sizes that are 22, which doesn't seem like a lot. But when you're breaking them down in half and you can only fit 11 or 12 in a classroom, it's extremely restrictive in what we can do programmatically.
Sure. And I do think one of the things the MSBA is starting to look at heavily is the issue on mechanical systems and ventilation. And we've certainly heard a lot from various districts across the Commonwealth over the last few months, trying to understand some of their older building systems and trying to put those into a better situation for dealing with viral transmissions and other endemic situations. So you may see more push actually for better building systems. What we are seeing is that the new buildings we're building are better set up. There's a system called displacement air, where the air comes in at a low velocity and comes up through the students and then is exhausted at the top of the building and sent out. Actually, we've been using that for a number of years now. It's a very good energy efficient system, but it also improves health performances in those spaces. And so what you are starting to see is some discussion at the MSBA about trying to push on some mechanical systems improvements.
So I did want to touch on, it may not be exactly what Bill was getting at, but in terms of the timing of this project from a debt perspective, you know, we're at a point where we're going to have some of the lowest debt levels we've had in 20 years, since a lot of the debt from the 3 school projects, Memorial, Middle, and High School, from the late 90s, early 2000s, are going to start coming off the books. It's part of what I was trying to show in the graphs I showed, but it's certainly a lot more detailed than that. But we are at a point where significant amounts of debt service are coming off the books, and that's why it's not just, we're not starting at a level point and just increasing. There are some other things that will help offset this. And you know, we've faced, and we've seen it in the past with the public safety building and the DPW, where we had a long period of time where this town did nothing in terms of its capital facilities, and that's kind of coming home to roost a little bit. And we've been able to get through 2 major projects. This is certainly the biggest we're going to encounter. We do have some smaller projects that I identified in terms of the water treatment plant and potentially a Parks and Rec facility that are relatively short-term possibilities. And then longer term, I think, you know, the question of when is the next school project, certainly as Mike Marcucci referenced, the Wheelock School would be next on the radar. I mean, my personal take and my professional take is that certainly would be 20 years from now before we would really encounter, unless there was some sort of huge surge in enrollment that we weren't prepared for. So I hope that helps in terms of the overall timing of the debt. It's never ideal, but unfortunately we can't ignore it forever. All right, hold on. Give me a second here. All right, I have Nicole Drummond, 8 Onondaga Lane. Nicole says, I want to thank everyone for your continued work on a much needed Medfield project. I fully support the new building being at the Wheelock site. Currently, my second child is a 4th grader at Dale, and my youngest could potentially be entering 4th in the new building. This is my second time I've sent a child to Dale, and the second time my kids have struggled with the transition. I know of many, many other families that feel the same way. School is much different than how it was when I was in elementary school. Kids struggle moving every 2 years. To be able to have familiar shared faces from moving from Wheelock to Dale on the same campus. And then to be able to have the ability to share would benefit so many kids. My second point is that although I know many families live near town, but there are also many of us who do not. To have a campus that is centrally located in Medfield would be beneficial. Thank you, Nicole. I'm just going through my list here. I have a question. I'm just trying to find it. Here we go. Janet McNulty, 41 Blacksmith Drive. Since the FAF Center is well past obsolete, has the town considered a more holistic plan to consider using the entire footprint to develop a community center along with the school in parallel, perhaps using the same buildings more efficiently? So the MSBA doesn't participate in that type of thing. We would certainly look at where the Park and Rec may be able to use the new building for certain events and things like that. But to do them together sets up something that becomes a bit more challenging, because then we have town residents who are saying, well, I support the school, but not the FAF Center, or vice versa. And it then creates a project that the town residents have a really difficult decisions on, while also increasing costs, because there may be many people who support a new school but don't support a new Parks and Rec, or vice versa. So, I mean, that certainly, that thing, I don't think would be out of the equation in the grand scheme of things, but it wasn't seen as something that was beneficial to the town. I do have Mel Siebold here, who I think wants to address this question as well. So I'm going to give Mel a quick minute. Mel, you with us? I think you're muted. Mel, can you unmute?
Michael?
There we go. We got you, Mel. So for those who don't know, Mel is the, I believe you're still the chairman of the Parks and Rec Commission, correct?
Yes. The Parks and Rec Commission, we're in support of the committee's recommendation to site the Dale Street School at Wheelock. We feel that should Dale Street become vacant, it would be one of two sites considered for a possible future Parks and Rec building. And logistically, it would be the commission's preferred site because of its central location and the fact that we use the property for summer camps and programs already. And we just feel that it would be an ideal site as opposed to, for instance, the state hospital site, the 12-acre parcel up there. No telling when any infrastructure would be brought to that site. It could be quite some time down the road. But as far as being centrally located, close to the Hinkley Pond for our camps, it would be ideal for us.
Al, I have a quick question about the programming. Do you get a lot of participation from, from folks in the center of town, like, who would want to walk to those programs during the summer and before and after, or maybe after school?
Oh, absolutely. We currently run MAP at the FAF Center. We've actually expanded it because of COVID, but we do have quite a few people that are coming because of the central location.
That downtown location is, you get a lot of walkers or bikers into the programs?
We do, to our program, same thing for the most part, our summer camps are mostly drop-offs, early morning, or same thing, pickups. But we do have the older kids, some of the programs we have for them, we do have bikers and walk-ins.
Awesome. Just curious. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mel. All right. All right, next question is from Sean McEntee, 6 Metacomet. I joined late, so apologies if this was already addressed, but what is the current thinking on the future of the Dale building if we build new at Wheelock? Are we just teeing up another big project? That was discussed, Sean. There's necessarily no answer, but I believe the way Mike Marcucci put it, we certainly wouldn't do a project just for the sake of doing a project. We have talked about the potential for Parks and Rec as an option for that building. There are other options. I think that would need to be evaluated. We would certainly look to the Board of Selectmen to form a committee to explore the options for that building should we do choose to abandon it as a school. So I think that those questions, while not fully answered, they are certainly in the minds of everybody here. All right. All right, I have Tracy Foley from 45 Elm Street. The Wheelock Fields provide a place for all grade levels to have practices after school and games on the weekends, and the green space behind the fields is used by residents for walking and running. How would that be impacted with the loss of space and additional parking lot from 90 to 200 spaces? We would be concerned with the message that this will be a campus with room to expand. So I can give you a little bit on the logistics. The new school option G1 that was recommended by the building committee would sit in the fields that are directly behind Wheelock, sort of between the real soccer fields that are used mostly on the weekends, and there's sort of a strip of wooded area that runs between the access road. So it would sort of sit in that field. That strip of woods, unfortunately, took a pretty big hit from the microburst that we had over here last week. Certainly, some of those trees have been taken down already, but it would sit between the buffer between the railroad. So all that tree line would be able to remain. And then in terms of the open space of the Holmquist land certainly wouldn't be touched on the other side of the tracks. We would maintain a wooded buffer along the railroad tracks. And then we are exploring the possibility of replacing that field with another field that would be along the sort of the wooded space between the access road and the soccer fields. So there would be some development. And obviously, from a landscaping perspective, we would look to replace, trees and woodlands, but there would be some parking in that zone, which would also help on the weekends to support the fields, be a little bit closer to that activity. But in terms of the overall open space, that would go about, I'd say, halfway back the fields. But the existing wooded buffer along the railroad tracks would remain. And we would also look to supplement that with additional plantings around the new building and around the parking lots.
Mike, I have that overlay if you want. I could share my screen.
Great. That would be great.
Oh, someone will have to give me permission.
Yeah, and I just stopped sharing, so maybe that will allow.
Okay. Do you guys see the overlay?
Yeah, so as you can see here, and again, not all of this is definite yet, and it's not exact, but the red outline, it would be the new building and would sit entirely in the field behind Wheelock, with a new drop-off loop in front. And then the potential for 1 or 2 replacement fields, soccer fields, you can see that would go along the access road. The access road would be relocated to the end of the parking lot, but that would still remain back to the water treatment area and the wells. But that wooded buffer that you see just to the west, Larry, if you could, so that wooded buffer, a large portion of that would remain depending on what fields exactly we choose to replace and how much of that we choose to keep. So it's a bit of a compromise. There's certainly going to be some that would go away to allow for parking and replacement fields, but we are maintaining as much wooded area along the rail line, and certainly would avoid anything having to do with the Holmquist land. Certainly, that's land that I use often myself, and that's not something that we were looking to touch at all. So I hope that clarifies things. Okay, next up I have Denise DiPiero from 74 Wood End Lane. Denise says the survey results from May show that the majority of the town would like the school to be at Dale Street. Additionally, Elm Street area residents and Dale Street area residents both prefer the new school to be at Dale Street. Why are we ignoring what the majority of the town wants? Second, Elm Street is barely a 2-lane road without snowbanks. Rerouting traffic seems like a band-aid to a much larger problem, unless that will be enforced on a daily basis. So in regards to the survey, I do disagree with the notion that it was the majority of the town, that was a few hundred responses, some of which I'm not even sure were town residents, not trying to say that it wasn't valuable information. The town also voted in that survey to support the grades 3 to 5. So in terms of overall response, the important takeaways there is we certainly didn't ignore it. It was certainly a factor in our decision making, but we didn't see an overwhelming majority saying that it has to be at Dale Street. So we chose Wheelock simply because there were other benefits that outweighed the concerns about keeping it at Dale, at least in the eyes of the SBC. In terms of that, we've received correspondence from residents of the Elm Street that wanted it Dale, residents of Dale Street that wanted it Dale, residents of Dale Street that want it at Wheelock, residents of Elm Street that wanted it at Wheelock. So there's certainly voices on either side. You know, we haven't gotten to a point where we know what the quote unquote majority of town is. We certainly hear the concerns of the Elm Street neighborhood. And as we've heard concerns from a few residents at the Dale Street neighborhood. So it is certainly something that we've taken into account, and we don't discount it. You know, certainly I understand it can be scary when these projects come up if you live in that neighborhood. So what I can tell you is that, you know, we've taken that into account. We will try to, you know, minimize any impact on the neighborhood should this proceed in that direction. And we will work hard to make sure that there is no negative effect. In terms of traffic, there is no rerouting of traffic. It's just that we would have a few more, we would have more car traffic from additional staff that aren't currently on that campus. And then the potential that we would be able to have to increase the amount of parent drop-off that would happen on that campus. It doesn't really reroute traffic because as people progress through the system, sooner or later they are going to the Wheelock site. There is an existing school there. It's really just an increase where there are 4 grades there instead of 2. Hope that clarifies that. All right. All right. So I have a Tom Powers from 24 Elm. Tom asked, does the school building committee have any suggestions they can offer for a Medfield senior living on a fixed income who might consider safely dropping from their monthly budget in order to fund up to an additional $100 a month in taxes? I don't know that I can opine on that. You know, certainly I know it's no fun when taxes go up. I don't know if I have an answer for you there, but you know, we certainly recognize that there is an additional burden on the taxpayer. I don't know if any of the selectmen want to chime in on that, or I don't have any further thoughts on it.
Mike, if no one else is going to jump in front, I'll jump in on that. Tom, this is an expensive school. There's no way we're going to get around it being an expensive school. I think at this point in the process, we're trying to figure out where the right place is to locate the school. And there is, I'd make a couple of points. Number one, to Mike and the building committee's credit, the numbers that you're seeing for the total cost of the school, as Mike has said on a number of occasions, are conservatively estimated, which in this case means they've gone with the high side numbers, not the low side numbers. So in a sense, what we're looking at here around what the cost of school is probably a worst case number. How much better it's going to get based on what the building committee can come up with, we'll have to see. I certainly, speaking personally, as I think some people here already know, I've already been concerned about the total cost. I think that I'm confident that my fellow selectmen would also be as responsible as they can on that. It won't make the problem go away, but if it helps at all to know that the scrutiny on cost and the issue of affordability is going to be a continuing part of this discussion. And it's not just a matter of figuring out what would people like, and then here's the price tag for it. I think you have some assurance that that's part of the conversation that we're going to have going forward. You're not the only one, certainly, that's talked to me about this issue. There are some things, as Mike pointed out, the other debt in the town will be going down over time. So Mike's projection of what the impact on you will be is whatever level you fall against that typical case. It won't actually be quite as bad as that in terms of the net taxes, although I think it's the right way to think about it. This is the incremental increase, or something like this would be the incremental increase that would come from this. So I hear you. That issue is not done yet, and we're not just automatically on a railroad track to what things are going to cost. That won't make the problem become trivial, but I think it will make the picture look a little less dire than maybe you're seeing it right now.
Thanks, Gus. All right. All right, next up I have Hillary Zivan from 11 Elm Street. Hillary says, I would like to address the comments made about Wheelock site as preferable because it offers more opportunities for outdoor classrooms. Living on the other side of the quote unquote outdoor classroom from Wheelock, a significantly large pond and woodland owned by the town. This property was beautiful when we moved here 30 years ago. Until about 20 years ago, I did see children playing in the area, but the whole property has overgrown into extreme disrepair, covered by poison ivy and black swallowwort. It clearly has not been used as an outdoor classroom. I rarely see any teachers and children outside of Wheelock now, other than sports and physical education. My comment is that I don't find that using the outdoor space at the Wheelock site is a realistic selling point. I'm a major proponent of outdoor education, worked in that field in my previous career, but I've been very pleased with the other types of outdoor education developed in Medfield, like the Pilgrim, canoe, bike trip, etc. So I'm not necessarily familiar with any of that. So Jeff, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the really good example that we have at Wheelock is the Victory Garden, right? I mean, I think that involves all second and third grade kids. It's a huge Victory Garden. It's a combination of teachers and master gardeners that volunteer their time. Kids plant everything in the spring. They go through and they take care of the garden. They harvest in the fall and they have their celebration. So I think that's just one example of the amount of, there's a lot of outdoor learning, and that's just a really good example of it. I think every kid that goes through the Medfield schools can talk about the Victory Garden and the celebration after that.
Thanks, Jeff. All right. Next up, I have a Renee Howley, 3 Harding Street. Thank you for all the information. I'd like to follow up on Mike Marcucci's answer around future use of a school at Wheelock as a potential 3 to 5 site. In looking at the information on the website, it appears that the school is the same square footage regardless of location, approximately 98,000 square feet for a 4-5 configuration. What does location change future use? Or why does location change future use?
So I don't think it would necessarily change the potential to use it as a 3 to 5. I think it was more, if you did that and enrollment stayed where it was, you might be in a position where you didn't need to replace the Wheelock school and you could consolidate from 3 to 2 schools. I don't think you would consolidate from 3 to 2 schools with all of the kids on the Dale Street site, because it would probably require an addition to Memorial, which I'm assuming would be cheaper than the replacement in toto of Wheelock. So I think you could go 3 to 5 either place from a space standpoint. Because alternatively, either you'd be pushing for more teachers in smaller classes, or you'll have empty classrooms in that building if the enrollment is not met. If the enrollment is met, that's obviously going to put a lot of pressure on our other 2 school buildings, because the projections from the MSBA are projecting an enrollment that is 20% higher than the highest enrollment the schools have had in their history, which is in the 2006 2008 time period, was about 3,100. We're at about 2,600 now, and they're projecting 3,700. So there'll be the knock-on effects of hitting those numbers if it does go up that way. I mean, frankly, if it does go up that way, we could be discussing about whether we need to keep Dale as a school, or at least partially as a school, for a period of time to deal with the overflow. But my comment that Ms. Holly is asking about relates to the potential to consolidate from 3 to 2 schools in the long run, which might be more cost effective, as it costs a lot more to build schools in the now than it did, in the 1960s.
Thanks, Mike. All right, I have a Diana Frisella. Sorry if I butcher your name. 20 Lee Road. Diana says, I am really excited about the prospect of a new school at Wheelock. Despite Denise's comment, I know there are many people in town who are very supportive of the school at Wheelock. Having a first grader and third grader, and realizing only my first grader may benefit from a new school, I feel strongly the combined campus at Wheelock makes the schools set up better for current children enrolled, but also for the next generation of kids who come after mine. Thank you, Diana. All right, I have Jerry Potts from 7 Curve Street. Jerry says, will there be an alternative showing presenting a tear down and new building in the same Dale spot? That option would appear by all indications to be far cheaper and retain the location a majority of the public has expressed as a preference. Also, has there been an analysis of the number of households within walking distance at Dale? Slide 11 shows much higher concentration of housing at Dale, which combined with easy access to downtown has never been discussed or addressed or quickly dismissed. In terms of that option was explored early on. I'm not sure where you would see that as being significantly less expensive. A tear down would involve basically displacing the entire school, so the building could be demolished and replaced, which would mean it would be a longer process in modulars, which would have to be, we'd have to find a place to locate those, probably on the field. I don't know if we'd have enough space to do that. Larry, you looked at this a little bit in the beginning, and I know that another reason why that option was dismissed early on is because the general feel was that people did want to save the building of the Dale Street School and not just demolish it in place. But Larry, you want to chime in a little on that?
Yeah, I think really the issue was in many communities have a sort of swing space school available where you can move a school out, renovate or demolish and replace an existing school building and then move all the students and faculty back in. We don't have that luxury here in Medfield. So as Mike says, we would have to create a new school to move those students to for 2± years. Sometimes communities have looked at, temporary construction purposes, going into a warehouse or a office building. Those are options if those happen to be available in the community, or you're essentially creating a farm full of modulars, which have all the problems of that you can imagine, access back and forth between classrooms, creating the sorts of big spaces you would want for gymnasiums or cafeterias become very difficult, library spaces and so forth. So while we did look at that very briefly, we felt that that was a hurdle that was just too far. And so we've really focused on the idea that in any of the schemes we've looked at, we would have to keep the students in the building for the majority of time. Even the ad reno scheme, we have considered putting a reasonably small number of modulars that would take care of some of the overflows during that construction. But we certainly have not thought about tearing down the existing building unless we figured out a way to deal with the students.
Would that be like 30 modulars, Larry, that we'd have to find a spot for?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically 26 classrooms, core classrooms, plus all the specials. So yeah, it could easily be 30, 35 modulars, and
Probably fit them at Metacomet Park, right, Mike? Right over the fields.
How would you handle cafeteria, gym, and the other spaces in that scenario, Larry?
When that happens, usually the kids are eating lunch in their classrooms. Gymnasium is similar to the issues we have on the Ad Reno scheme. You may be living without a gym for a period of a couple of years, and or trying to overlap with another facility somewhere, busing the kids to gym in or walking them around the corner if Wheelock, or excuse me, if Memorial had space. But you know, that's a real issue with timing and scheduling.
Larry, it's worth adding that that temporary space, whether it's modulars or rental, is not reimbursable by the MSBA. So that's fully at cost to the district.
Right, and that's a good point to remember. And those are really, it adds up pretty quick.
And so in your opinion, would that be an option that would be less expensive than the options we're exploring? Far
No,
cheaper,
I wouldn't say so, because any savings potentially would be eaten up by the modulars and then some.
Right. Thank you. All right. Bear with me here. I do have a question from Tracy Foley at 45 Elm. I believe we've answered it in regards. This goes back to, she says the Wheelock fields provide a place where all grade levels have practices. I think I already answered that. How would that be impacted with the loss of space? Yeah, sorry, I just didn't finish that one. Apologies. All right, so I have a comment, not a question, from sorry, there's no address on that. Again, if anybody's listening and they want to post a comment or question, please provide your address. All right. I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, that Chris McHugh Potts would like to speak through audio. He is from 7 Curve Street. So bear with me. Are you with us, Chris?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So one of the questions that I have probably about just 4 questions, and I'll just rattle off the questions really quick. I'm trying to remember, having been to the various SBC meetings, if the SBC at any point in time, maybe before I started attending, ever really reviewed the town goals that have been put out there by the selectmen before they weighed in at any point on the site selection. You know, I know that there's a point in there about decision-making that takes into account ongoing maintenance. I don't know whether ongoing maintenance of yet another new school building would be factored into the cost at all. And also looking at a socially balanced town population, especially with regard to affordable housing. I know as part of that town goal, we do have a number of affordable housing communities that are in walking distance to Dale Street School. And so they would be much further away if they were relocated to Wheelock, especially at an age when kids are at the maturity level that they can actually walk home from their affordable housing. And I think that's something that, you know, are there going to be mitigation efforts to actually help those families if the school moves farther away? I also think that, you know, with regard to the new standards with the social studies and civics education, and I know this is also part of the town goal, we want to provide opportunities for our youth to observe and partake in town government with 4th and 5th graders right there in the center of town. That gives them that opportunity. So how would that happen? we would have to have bus costs, additional bus costs to actually allow them to take advantage of that instead of walking into town. And I also noticed in the educational visioning sessions that this was actually mentioned as a priority. And the downtown location was also mentioned as a priority in the visioning sessions based on the notes that I received and then I looked at. I also think it's important with regard to the traffic issues and the walkability factor. I'm wondering if we're going to hear from the police chief at all or our public safety officers about that issue. I know Phillip Street and the other and Elm Street, Upper Elm, do not have any sidewalks. We will not have a walkability factor like we do over at Dale Street. In chatting with one of the crossing guards over at Dale Street, she said that on any given day, we have up to at least 25 kids who walk and many, many, many bikers. And I asked about Wheelock. She said, we really don't really have any over there. It's just not safe. And it's just not enough. It's not dense enough to have that many kids as well. I also want to know, will the school committee ever actually have a discussion about the educational pros and cons of each of the sites? Because that hasn't happened at all. We have not had I've not been to a school committee meeting where those in-depth conversations about the educational pros and cons of each site have ever been discussed. And I think it's really important that the school committee actually takes up that discussion before the site selection is made. We have a school building committee that's awesome, and people on that committee wear various different hats. But with the site criteria, you had people who are in construction, the construction industry, weighing in on educational benefits without the benefit of a school committee discussion to draw on. And you also had educational professionals who are on the school building committee weighing in on construction without having really a whole lot of knowledge about that. So, I'm not really sure that the site criteria matrix provides a great representation. There was also, I believe, 13 members of the school building committee, and there were 4 members who did not fill out the site criteria. So when you do averages, that kind of skews it a little bit. And I think that's just something that it would be good to hear from those missing members as well. And then I think the other piece of it is just lastly, there's a lot of talk about the long-term, that this is a long-term project. We have to look at the 50-year impact of this on the town in terms of flexibility and the future of our town. School construction, kids going through that is really such a short blip in time in the scheme of things when we're talking about a 50-year building that's going to last 50 years. This is going to destroy open space at Wheelock. We are going to take away the opportunity for 4th and 5th graders to be able to access a downtown location, which has been so great for them over the years. And we're also going to be, from an educational standpoint, we're going to be making the transition to 6th grade harder for those 5th graders if they move over to Wheelock. Those kids, once they exercise their independence, they have the ability to transition a lot easier to 6th graders. I've talked to educators about this, and even our curriculum director mentioned that the research is out there that shows that the transition to 6th grade is in fact one of the most difficult. And so we are going to make it more difficult for the 5th graders over at Wheelock to transition to Blake. So my question is, how is that transition going to be helped with this project?
So let me get that straight, just so I'm clear on the question. The question is, how is the 6th grade transition going to be helped by the selection of the site?
What would the school district do to help with the transition of 5th graders to 6th graders, both from a developmentally and a social emotional standpoint?
So Jeff, can you respond to how the transition from 5th to 6th might change or be helped by this?
Be the same thing we do now. The building where the buildings at Dale Street or the buildings at Wheelock, that is not going to impact transition to 6th grade. I don't think that as a town, we're going to make decisions about where we place a school based on the 4 half days that kids can go get a slice of pizza. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for us to even say that. I would say that there's just as many kids from Blake in 6th grade that come downtown on half days than kids from Dale Street. So I don't understand the argument. I really don't. I think that it's, you're looking at a situation where kids may walk downtown maybe 4 or 5 days a year. I mean, Steve Gredham's on here. He sees it every day. He knows what the actual counts are. Maybe he can add some interesting anecdotes to that.
Yeah, Jeff, I've heard that discussion point before, and just in my 6 years here, I would have to say, and I'm out usually at recess and rival dismissal and all that, there's very few kids, talking to Maureen Barrett, who is here, Kristen Gobin, Megan Infantino, who are really in charge of dismissal at the end of the day. I would say in the half days, it is something where we have a lot of kids walking uptown. I will be honest too, I get a lot of phone calls from parents insecure and feeling they're getting pinched by their kids, that they don't really want them to walk uptown, but they feel like they're getting pressured into doing that. But yeah, right now it's different. We have a lot of bikers, which is great because of the COVID and people, I think, feeling not wanting to ride the bus. But I would say we have a majority of kids walking uptown, a good number on the half days we have, but on any of the other probably 170 plus days, there's very seldom a lot of kids that walk out of here. Most of our kids are bused by that time, or if they're signed out as walkers, sometimes the parents want to circumnavigate and pick them up at the tennis court so they can have an easier access to get out.
All right, thank you for the question. Next up, bear with me for a second. I do have a couple of repeats I do want to get to. I do have a question from Kathy McDonald, 99 Elm Street. How can we be prepared to have a vote on the location without the impact and info of a traffic study will yield to the surrounding area? I can tell you that that's not ideal. I'm not hiding that by any stretch. Unfortunately, COVID put us in a position where we just couldn't do it. We have to make an informed decision based on the information we have at hand. I can tell you from past experience that these types of projects can usually be mitigated in terms of traffic. I'm confident this one can as well. But we will be having traffic studies performed. They're going to be starting very soon, like within a matter of days, so that we can get data now. We're in a place where we can have data. So we'll be able to share that data with the community as soon as it's available. And we do plan to have a meeting with the neighborhood to discuss that data once it's all pulled together. So look for that in probably a couple of weeks. All right, jumping back. I do have a comment that I wanted to get to here. Bear with me. Okay, I have a Michelle Kirby from 27 Planting Field Road. Michelle says, I just want to say I feel like the committee has done an excellent job vetting all possible options. I'm sorry, it's Kirkby, excuse me. I have 3 young children and these school decisions will directly affect our family and their education. I support a new school at Wheelock. Thank you, Michelle. Next up, I'm going to go to a repeat from Kevin Stoddard, 6 Baker Road. And Kevin says, since 2015, all 40B developments have been done north of Route 109 and on or west of North Street. In use, under construction, plus the Aura apartments coming to the Legion Hall total 265 units. This doesn't include anything being added on Ice House Road or any type of project at Medfield State Hospital. This quadrant of town will have all of the massing and density that makes 40Bs work. Anytime anyone from this town needs to go to Medfield Center, they cross Dale on North Meadows Road or drive down North Street. Keeping the school at Dale Street keeps traffic pressure on this part of town. The Wheelock site seems to offer the most opportunity as to future changes to building design or need. Wheelock has Danielson Pond and the Holmquist Reservation nearby to provide outdoor education opportunities. Medfield was/is a rural town that has grown a lot. We can restore some of that character when Dale is at Elm. All right, thank you, Kevin. I have another duplicate question. We've got, sorry, not a duplicate, but a second question from Hilly Passis at 24 Marlin. And Hilly says, I know that the town is in the process of preparing a master plan. Shouldn't that committee be involved with the site selection as well? And shouldn't the master plan vision for the town take priority over the site selection? How far along is the process of the master plan right now? The master plan, I can't speak to that. That's being led by Jay Duncan. Maybe the selectmen can advise on the where it is from a priority perspective. But in terms of how the town uses its sites, both of these sites are owned by the town, or school-owned property that will function as schools. The discussion about potentially changing, the Dale Street building to another use, whether it be another town use like Park and Rec or something else, that question certainly could be brought up with the master plan. The master plan committee has members of the building, a member of the building committee representing it. It has members from a lot of different committees around town. So the makeup of that committee, including Jess Riley from the school committee, who has so much free time, she can volunteer for that one too. Just kidding, Jess. But they're definitely, the intent here is that this project has to move forward, and it quite honestly can't be waiting on deciding about a master plan. I don't know that the master plan would, take the same process that we have to go through with the MSBA. It would probably be a very different process. What I can tell you is, someone who studied master planning, we're really not making drastic changes in terms of a master plan, because both sites are schools. It's really just a question of where the density is, and increasing one at a larger site to free up some space on the smaller site. That's just my 2 cents. Does anybody from the Board of Selectmen want to chime in regarding the master plan?
I'm on the master planning committee, so I can give you a little bit of detail on it. The master plan should be ready for the town in the next year, hopefully less than a year. There's a public forum coming up in the next month on the implementation of it. But I don't think they actually, Jess, maybe you can chime in too, but I don't think we're really looking at sites for particular buildings. I mean, we're not really looking for a site for the Park and Rec facility, or for a school. That hasn't been part of the discussion.
I would say, and that in general, because the master plan is really supposed to take a very high level look at how the town progresses, but does not make these kind of like micro decisions in terms of that very long-term view around where a school goes in particular. One of the things I do know is that one of the things that I have seen in some of the drafts of the master plan and how we might implement it is around making neighborhoods safer in terms of increasing sidewalks, in terms of increasing bike lanes, really kind of working in that ability to connect different spokes of the town to each other, and opening up the town to more pedestrian access, to more opportunities for wellness and for exercise, that's actually part of a master plan. So when we look at having a school that is, a 25-minute walk or a 20-minute walk from downtown, as opposed to a 5 to 7 minute walk, I think that there's definitely some ability to kind of make an intersection there where we're really thinking about how our spokes are connected, right? How we are getting, how we are able to create, community centers in the middle of town, perhaps through the Parks and Rec. But they are not really speaking specifically about like where a school should go, or where, it really kind of gives you zones, not so much, and ideas to work towards. So that's, does anybody have any questions about that? Was that somewhat clear? All right.
All right. Jumping back to the top, I have another question from Kevin Stoddard. COVID-19 has had an impact to delivering educational programming to students. If the state were to issue updated guidelines to new school building construction, do the experts on the SBC think they would require smaller schools with fewer students or larger classrooms to accommodate social distancing? If classrooms must be larger due to new guidelines that could come prior to breaking ground, can either site accommodate an expanded footprint? And if so, how much larger could the building be and still be located at either site? So we touched on this a little bit, and I'll let Larry chime in also as well. COVID-19 currently, from a design perspective and school building construction perspective, the primary impacts seem to be more focused on systems right now. There still is a belief that this is a short-term issue in how we choose to operate our schools with hybrids and remote learning, et cetera. So I don't know that anyone really has an answer in terms of if for some reason at some point it seemed like this was going to become a more permanent norm for our country. I don't know if we would be looking at doing larger schools or even going to more remote learning. So we'd be doing smaller schools. All of that's kind of speculation. But in terms of which sites have the capacity for growth, obviously, you know, the Wheelock site does offer more opportunity there. And it should be noted, and I think I touched on it earlier, that all of these projects do require, the MSBA requires that we have a very basic plan for how the school would grow by 15% should there be a surge in enrollment that's even beyond the projections. So that does happen. One of the reasons why our enrollment projections are as high as they are is because of a similar project that was done in Hopkinton, where they had enrollment projections, and then there was a sudden surge in enrollment that was unexpected. And during the process of the project, they actually had to add classrooms to that building, which they were able to do and still get the building open on time. So they're very conservative about their enrollment projections and in terms of making sure they're as accurate as possible. But ultimately, that remains to be seen in terms of whether that will become a reality. And you're going to get different opinions, obviously, from this group here about how real that is. But in terms of the capacity to accommodate growth, you know, the Wheelock site, and that may be not necessarily growth for this project, but growth for a future replacement of Wheelock could be on that site or another site that could be evaluated another time as well. But there is certainly more flexibility there. Larry or Emily, do you want to touch on any of the COVID impacts?
Yeah,
sure.
I just want to say that the MSBA hasn't revised their square footage guidelines, and if they do, it'll be interesting. And I know that the MSBA.
Oh, looks like we're getting another battle of
your
Fortnite.
video. All right, maybe she'll be back in a second. Larry, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, we mentioned it earlier, the MSBA has not responded to or changed their guidelines. Typically what we're seeing is that the typical classroom, if you do try to maintain your 6-foot distances, as people are recommending, you're going down to a reduced number of students, or you're building a classroom that's essentially double the size in order to keep your student count the same. So we are working with a school that happened to have some spare classrooms, and they took them apart this summer and put them back together as sort of double wides. But we aren't seeing that as a really strong desire at the state level, nor with any of the communities, again, because the basic theory is in a year or two, this will hopefully be beyond us, and we'll be back to some degrees of normal. I think the other thing to think about in that sort of a situation is the cafeteria and gymnasiums. Those are really the hardest spaces We have been working with districts to try and convert their gymnasiums to cafeterias, where the kids are sitting 6 feet apart in a long grid row, and it is really tough. So again, I think the goal is that hopefully in soon we will get back to a more normal.
Yeah, sorry, I froze again. I think what we're seeing is more sinks, touchless bathrooms, and bigger hallways, so you can have 2-directional flow.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Emily.
Yep.
All right. Next up, I have looks like another comment from Michelle Kirkby, 27 Planting Field Road. Michelle says, I'm not sure how many families have been surveyed on whether they would let their kids walk or bike to a new Wheelock location, but I can say I'd be more likely to let my 4th and 5th grader bike walk to the Wheelock location and would not let them go to Dale. The arguments sound like you're going to lose walkers and bikers, and I don't feel like that's an accurate statement. An accurate representation of the families that live near the school. Okay, next up. So just a reminder for anybody who might be throwing in questions, please provide your full name and address so I can read them aloud. So follow-up questions from Chris Potts. She says, we didn't really answer the questions. Did the SBC take into town goals when making site decision, especially when choice of a Wheelock site runs counter to those goals? I'm not exactly sure what goals those are counter to. How will families in affordable housing be helped if they encounter transportation challenges? I believe, Jeff, do you want to talk about transportation real quick?
In what sense, Mike?
Just like, I mean, we provide, busing as a service. And
yeah, so we typically bus 85 to 90% of our elementary kids. This is obviously not the case this year because we're restricted to 24 kids per bus. But in normal times, we're busing almost all of our elementary kids.
And that service is available to the affordable housing residents?
Yeah, I just don't get the assumption there for the affordable housing, but yeah, absolutely. There seems to be some kind of assumption about transportation and affordable housing, but we absolutely bus students everywhere.
Quite to the contrary, Mike. I'm pretty excited that Parks and Rec is targeting that site, the Dale Street site, because I'm kind of looking forward to my kids having access from middle school to be able to get to Parks and Rec after school, for programming and activities. So I think it'll be a great opportunity for people to have access downtown. So.
Thanks. And then another follow-up question from Chris. When will the police chief be engaged in safety issues related to Wheelock site? Police chief and fire chief, all public safety officials that govern that have been involved to date. They've been reviewing both sites. They talk to us about what they will need from an emergency response perspective. As of the meetings that we've had with them to date, they've expressed that no site is either better or worse, at least outwardly to us. And then another follow-up just in terms of police chief engagement related to pedestrian biker safety versus security related issues. In terms of biker / pedestrian safety, the Wheelock site does have a full sidewalk between the school site all the way to the center of town. And, obviously as it gets into neighborhoods, that goes away, but pedestrian biker safety to town is equivalent, though it may be a longer distance, it is equivalent in terms of safety. And then in terms of security related issues, the buildings, elementary schools are designed to a different level than when most of us were kids. So there are much more security issues that are addressed through the design of the building. And that has to do with how people are able to enter the building, locking of doors, security cameras, all sorts of different things. So as we get further on into the design of the project, both chiefs will be engaged to go over emergency response and to go over security issues. And then I have another question from Chris McHugh Potts. What is our K-1 enrollment this year? I don't know if you have that handy, Jeff or Mike or.
Mike, I don't have it handy. I can just tell you that the kindergarten enrollment is below what was projected.
Thank you. So there's a few more without addresses. And I do know I have a Melissa McCormick. I do know Melissa. She lives on Summer Street. And I know her husband. They're both great. But she says keep Dale at Dale. So I appreciate that. And I do know that she is a resident and voiced her opinion. Thank you, Melissa. And then I do have one more question from Chris McHugh Potts. She says, so if you have children who cannot stay after school for extracurricular offerings and misses the bus and has no parent transportation, how is that equitable?
Make them walk home in the cold snow, Mike. It's a new policy, I think, we're considering. Jess is going to hate me. Sorry.
I'm not doing the hating on you at all, Leo, but I do know that these are conversations that we have had, and probably if the world hadn't stopped around COVID, we would be trying to make kind of more of an effort around being able to get kids back and forth or to extra help, or being able to kind of have kind of a later transportation system. I know it was something we were talking about last year. Obviously, yep. You know, funding is our middle name, but these are things that we're aware of and we are trying to move forward. It's a burden for every family, I would think, that has two parents who are working, but I'm not sure that is as much of a consideration on a regular basis at the Dale Street School right now for kids in 4th, 5th. I'd see that more as a consideration around middle school and high school, where there are extra help hours afterwards. And these are, you know, when a situation is presented to you that you have to solve, you solve it, right? I mean, that's kind of what we do, hopefully.
All right, looks like another question just popped in. I have Kristen Martin from 91 Green Street. Can you talk to the benefits / drawbacks from the potential site plans to the special ed population? I think that's a good question. I don't know if Jeff, you want to handle that or?
Sure. I mean, I just, you know, from my perspective, I think we mentioned it earlier too, looking at the Wheelock site and having the campus-like setting really provides us with an opportunity to develop programs for both schools. And I think we said that during the 3, 4, 5, and we were looking at that at Wheelock, and it still holds true if we have a 4, 5 over the Wheelock site. It allows us for much greater programming possibilities for students. Obviously, having the new spaces is going to be incredible for our programming, but the shared staff piece is just can't be overlooked when you have 2 schools in a campus-like setting, and we share staff as it is anyway. This is really going to be a benefit to all students.
Yeah, would this open up an opportunity to allow you know, special ed specialists to continue working with grades and perhaps follow a grades like in a looping scenario?
Absolutely.
Because I know some students that were working with specialists, and they get to know Miss Forrester at Memorial. 2 years gone, they have to get broken into a whole new system at Wheelock, and so I think that would be really a huge benefit for that population.
We've talked about the transitions numerous times tonight, and we've talked about it in other settings as well. That
at length.
Just such an important piece for all kids, those transitions, and having spending 2 years at Wheelock and then going right next door to a new building for the next 2 years is beneficial for everyone.
One other thing I'd like to say is that allowing having 4 grades in one place, and particularly grades that have kids who span kind of the upper elementary grades, to be able to have all of those kids have access to the best facilities and the most modern facilities for OT, for physical therapy, to have wider spaces, to be able to share those kind of better designed spaces really impacts every kid. And one of the things that I think that we have all individually thought about as we've been thinking about the Dale Street School and its placement is how do we make the best, how do we give the best physical experience of school to the most children within our district in a way that is appropriate? And I know that for myself, I have always I've looked at Dale and I've seen the space and I've always thought, wow, that is, it's a great central location, but is it truly the best thing to make sure that our kids are getting the most benefit from our tax dollars, right? Like we could think very much about like, okay, well, Dale has always been at Dale. Let's make sure it's there. It seems like there's this one good thing or this one positive thing. And there are positives to Dale, absolutely. But there are more educational positives that hit more children at the Wheelock site, in my mind, than there are at Dale. And so in the end, it becomes, how do we weigh those priorities? And for me, I always have to think about that truly, I can see more children having more benefit in an age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate way at Wheelock with 2 schools on one campus than I can see by decreasing the amount of, outdoor space and having 2 schools next to each other in the center of town, but are not really addressing many of the other things that I've heard people worry about and think about, which is this kind of ping-ponging staff around town, trying to get them to the right place. And these transitions that we so consistently worry about, no matter where you are in terms of your educational population. We need to be able to make sure that we are reaching the most kids at the time, right? That's really where we have to put our resources. And so these are tough decisions, but I feel very confident for myself that Wheelock has really been the place that would be able to provide more of those check boxes than the Dale Street at this point. And Dale Street will not go away. There's a wonderful piece of our heritage there, as far as I know. I mean, there are other uses for that building that could also enhance our community. But at the same time, the site itself does not necessarily enhance the education of the number of children that we need to reach every day.
Thanks, Jess. All right, I have a follow-up question from for you, Jess. Actually, I guess it's more of a comment from Hilly Passes.
Hi, Hilly.
Jess, I disagree that the before and after school is mostly at MS and middle school and high school level. My kids have always had to do some of the music program outside school hours.
Jeff, can you speak to that? Because it's been a couple of years since I was in Dale, and we're musicians, but maybe not with our fingers in the Riley house. So, or Steve, please.
I'm thinking more maybe private lessons outside of school.
Yeah. I know that I always had to drive my kids over to, whatever facility was
Yeah,
during?
that would be correct, Jeff, and Jess. Right now, we don't have any after school. We have after school offerings like enrichment classes, but none of them are music. I think sometimes kids might go to private music lessons, but none of our music teachers offer anything at Dale Street past school hours.
Okay. Thanks, Hilly, though. I appreciate you, you asking that.
All right, I have, looks like a comment from Jenny Kin from 6 Carmen Circle. I fully support Dale at Wheelock location. I live at 6 Carmen Circle, which is across from Wheelock. The thought of my Dale kiddo attending school that may be under construction worries me. I'm concerned about health/education during construction. What is the impact on the kids during it? Air quality, noise, disruption to class, location, gym/cafeteria, decreased outdoor space if COVID's still an issue, etc. The kids have gone through a lot since March. Less disruption, the better. Thanks for your hard work. Thank you, Jenny. What I will say in terms of the construction process and what would happen in terms of safety, that is a huge priority for any school project. Obviously, we have a team in Arrow Street and left field that is experienced in school construction that will be representing us. We will eventually bring on a contractor that will be very experienced in school construction. And all of those factors, air quality, noise, disruption of classes, all of those things will be taken into account. But to say there won't be any impacts is not fair. No matter which site we choose, there will be certainly noise and some disruption to classes. But as an architect and someone who lives in construction, they can also be teaching opportunities. I know when I was a kid, I loved seeing heavy equipment move around, and there's ways that we can do that in a safe way that kids can learn about building and construction, and then see the project come out of the ground and eventually turn into a building. So I like to look at it both ways. Yes, we can definitely keep it safe and minimize the impact on the kids, but there's also an opportunity here for them to learn some things. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know if anybody else wanted to chime in there. All right, looks like one more question just rolled in. We have Kristen Caro from Flintlock Lane. I apologize if this has been asked. Regardless of the location of the new 4 to 5 school, has it been discussed whether grades pre-K to 1 and grades 2 to 3 would stay in their current buildings? I'm wondering if we have considered a campus that would provide more continuity regardless of the new school's location. An example, flip-flopping pre-K 1 and 2, 3 students currently at Memorial / Wheelock. So grades pre-K to 1 on Elm with grades 2 to 5 on Adams, or grades 2 to 5 in 2 buildings on Adams with pre-K to 1 move to Elm versus other options depending on the new school's location. There's 2 things that I want to address here. One is sort of tactical and legal and having to do with the MSBA. The MSBA won't allow us to do that. We can't suddenly start juggling classes and school buildings all over town. It's not the way this project was conceived, and that would require starting from scratch. Now, from a logistical perspective, the other reason that won't work is, I think Larry alluded to earlier, or Jeff alluded to earlier, the Memorial School was designed for early elementary. It's sized that way. The toilets, the size of the classrooms, the sinks, and how high they're mounted. Those types of things are sized for pre-K to 1 kids. To put either even a 2 to 3 or a 4 to 5 in there would make it not function the way it was designed to function. So I appreciate the creativity here, but unfortunately the buildings aren't as flexible as we'd like them to be in that regard. Larry or Jeff, you want to chime in on that at all, or did I cover it? Okay. Okay, so those are all of the questions that I have up on the old Q&A. So I'm going to turn it back now to the Board of Selectmen and see if Pete, you or Gus or Mike had anything you would like to either ask or opine on.
I would like to ask Mike whether this is the extent of the additional process that the school building committee has envisioned, or are you looking to have additional meetings?
So this really wasn't our vision. So I'd really look to Gus to see what else he would need. We have talked about in our planning to do a couple of neighborhood meetings, and that would be sort of targeted to the neighborhood at Wheelock around the traffic studies that we're doing. Those are going to be planned for early November. So we are planning to do that. And I guess, so I would be looking to the Board of Selectmen for guidance, because this really wasn't sort of our process. We certainly took your feedback and we're happy to guide it through whatever you see as next steps.
So I guess
I would go. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, Pete, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that I was going to ask you and Gus the same questions, Mike. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, my thinking was, this was the public forum that was held. I think we have a school building committee meeting next week. I think it would make sense for kind of one of our lead agenda items to be to take the feedback from the public forum here for the committee members to discuss it. Obviously, Mike, as you've done with all of our school building committee meetings, they're held in the public and there's an opportunity for public participation. So I think, we're 3+ hours into this. Probably doesn't make sense for us to discuss it now. I know I'd like to consider what we've discussed and the points that have been raised, and I think other committee members will as well. So I think the next step would be our meeting next week to kind of discuss through these different issues that were raised, and different committee members can weigh in and talk through the stuff that has come up. That would be my suggestion for our next step. And I think, Mike, you've alluded to a meeting focused on traffic in the Elm Street area for the neighbors. That would be part of this as well. But I do think the next step is for the committee to talk about all of this, and we have a meeting next week for that.
Yeah, I would just add, just from a logistical standpoint, we are going, if we're going to stay on this new revised schedule, we do need to get to a point where the Board of Selectmen make their vote, certainly by middle of November at the latest, because otherwise we will miss another board date, which has all sorts of other impacts. So we're trying to cram in as much as we can in the weeks that we have. But I know it was important that we publicize this forum with a minimum of 2 weeks ahead of it, which is what we've done. And we reached out, special thanks go to Anna May and her leadership of the communications subcommittee for broadcasting it in so many different outlets with the assistance of Left Field. And so it does appear that word was spread widely. We did have, I think the highest I saw at one point was 93 attendees, not just the panelists. We have an additional 25 panelists. So we did get good attendance. I believe that COVID has actually helped us in that regard. We've had far more participation in any public meeting that I've been a part of since COVID started through these virtual meetings than we ever had by a factor of 8 or 10.
Zoom really is easier for the residents to attend. It absolutely is.
And I hope we learn a lesson from this and find a way to adjust our laws to accommodate this moving forward, because it does allow for people to participate much more proactively.
Gus, did you want to weigh in on scheduling?
Yeah, seeing as I was probably the principal perpetrator of complicating your process, Mike. First, my compliments to you on how you ran this meeting. You were obviously everybody here has contributed, but you were on the hot seat for the bulk of the time, and I was marveling at the way you were just taking questions that came in as they came in, and Perhaps you read them before you read them out publicly, but I know you didn't have a whole lot of time to think about that. When I pushed for this at our last meeting, one of the questions I got is, okay, so if we do this once, is it done? And I balked at that because I didn't want to see a mechanical meeting that said, okay, check, we're good to go. I'm stating this here because if I'm completely out of sync with what the people at this meeting feel, I want the feedback. But my sense was this was the kind of meeting that I was thinking would be important for the building committee to have with the public. There was a pretty thorough airing of a lot of different views. I think the majority of the people in the public understand that no committee can deliver everything to what everybody wants, because there's people that are on both sides of the aisle here. So my first thought to the question around, is this done yet, is this was the kind of meeting, as I noticed there were 93 is when it peaked out. Based on this meeting, I don't have any personal feeling like there's a crying need for another one of these meetings, because I think this meeting provided that airing. I assume that people will give us feedback between now and when the Board of Selectmen do vote one way or the other on confirming the recommendation. I think your schedule had us doing that on the 3rd of November, which would be
That
our
was
first.
tentative.
Yeah,
Obviously, we haven't talked about it with you yet.
right. Well, so publicly here, I'll throw my opinion out. That would give us as selectmen one meeting to mull it over and talk about it, or just digest it. But my own view is I think it's reasonable to expect this to be on our agenda on the first meeting in November, whenever we hold it.
I don't think it'll be November 3rd, Gus.
Yeah, it's not 3rd, that's the election.
Is that the election day? Oh,
Yeah.
Election day.
Forget it. Well,
So
that
the
won't be our
10th
meeting. My point was I don't come out of this meeting feeling like there's this glaring gap in the opportunity the public's had to say what they want to say. So that's where I am on that. I'll make, in case this helps anybody or just shows what I didn't understand, I'd make a couple observations about this discussion. First, one of the things I come away with, and I think a couple of people posted comments to this effect, at the level of definition that we have this project defined and the closeness of the costs of the various options, I personally have concluded that cost at this level of definition is not a driving factor in figuring out what the right thing to do is. The right thing to do here is to understand the arguments, primarily the arguments for the different sites. And I've been keeping a pros and cons list on both of those, and I won't bore people with it right here. But for the people out there that are considering this, I think that the case, you want to take a look at the arguments for the different sites and the value that they deliver. Ideally, everybody comes away with this feeling like they've had a chance to air their questions and to hear things and have their questions answered. Some number of people are going to have to realize that we're going to call a shot and go in a particular direction that may not be the one that they advocated for at the time. But I'm hoping that they will be satisfied that their issues were heard, their questions were answered. As I think some people have pointed out, a big concern I had at our last meeting was that we would have latent opposition to funding this project when the time came to vote on it. And to the extent a meeting like this could help not have opposition that's there just out of resentment at having being shut out of the process, I'm hoping that this meeting did some good. And we'll know down the road. So I think this was a good meeting. I think it accomplished what I was hoping a meeting like this would accomplish. I don't immediately see a need for another meeting like this unless the feedback, tells you that you need one, and that would be your call to make. I assume we'll still get feedback from people, so there's still some things to think about. But thanks for putting this on. Thanks for everybody who got the word out.
Thank you, Gus. So I guess, and Pete, maybe you could chime in too, but should we target November 10th for the vote? And then, do you think that any further presentation would be needed at that meeting from the school building committee, or do you think you have the data that you need?
I actually have November 10 on my calendar as a selectmen's meeting already, so that's ideal. I don't think that there's any more need for a presentation from the school building committee, because I think the select board has heard that presentation half a dozen times now.
Oh, Marcucci's up to like 3 dozen.
Yes. And I would second Gus's comments, Mike. I think you did an excellent job of running this meeting.
Thank you.
It reminded me of the calm demeanor of Tim Bonfatti running the meetings back in 2001,
Well,
and
I've learned a
2002.
I've learned a few things from my colleague, Mr. Bonfatti.
It's very similar. Yep. So in order to close our meetings, each board has to have a motion to end their meeting and then a roll call vote. So that, Mike, did you want to make a motion for our Board of Selectmen to end our meeting at this point?
Sure, I will move that the Board of Selectmen adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Aye.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Would you like me to go next, Mike? Motion to adjourn the school committee meeting.
So moved.
Leo so moves. Roll
Second.
call, Anna Mae?
Yes.
Leo?
Aye.
Tim?
Yes.
Megan?
Yes.
And I, Jessica Riley. School committee meeting is adjourned.
I'll entertain a motion from the school building committee to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Not all at once. All right, so I've got a motion from Leo Brem and a second from Jeff Marsden. So I'll run down the roll call. Anna Mae O'Sheabrook,
Yes.
Jeff Marsden,
Yes.
Mike Marcucci,
Yes.
Walt Kincaid,
Yes.
Leo Brem,
Yes.
Mike Weber,
Yes.
Tom Erb,
Yes.
and Tim Bonfatti.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good
everyone.
night.
Have a good evening.
Good night.